Welcome and thank you for coming here tonight to this quiet place at the end of your day where there is nothing at all for you to do now but settle back and grow comfortable and let the world go slowly soft and dim around you. Wherever you are as you listen to this, whether you are lying in the dark with your eyes already closed or curled beneath a warm blanket with the last small light of the day still glowing somewhere nearby, you have arrived now at the one part of the day that belongs entirely to you, the quiet hour, the resting hour, the slow and gentle drift down into sleep. And so there is no hurry here, and nothing to solve, and nothing to remember, and nothing to carry with you into the dark. And you may let your shoulders grow heavy, and let your breathing grow slow, and let yourself sink down, a little at a time, into the soft and waiting quiet. Tonight, for a long while, for as long as it takes you to fall asleep, and for a good long time after, I am going to tell you stories, gentle old stories, about the friendly masked hero who swings between the tall buildings of the great bright city, the young man in the red and blue who catches falling people out of the air, and who has, beneath his cheerful mask, one of the kindest and most careworn hearts in all of the old tales. These are stories you may know already, in pieces, from here and there, and that is all to the good, for the best stories to fall asleep to are the ones you half remember, the ones that do not startle or surprise, but only unfold, slowly and warmly, like a familiar path walked in the evening, so that you need not listen closely and need not try to follow, and may let the words wash over you like a slow, warm tide, and drift and let go. I will tell them slowly and softly and without any hurry at all, and if the stories sometimes wander into shadow, into sorrow, into the darker corners of the young hero's long life, you need not be troubled by that, for I will tell even the sad parts gently, in a low and even voice, the way you might tell an old and beloved tale to someone you were trying to soothe to sleep, so that the sorrow becomes only a soft and distant thing, a gentle sadness, a quiet music playing far away, nothing at all that could keep you awake or trouble your rest. For these are stories about a good young man who tried, again and again, through every kind of trouble and every kind of grief, to do the right thing. And there is a deep comfort in that, in following such a heart through all its trials, and it is a comfort you may carry down with you now into sleep. We will follow him tonight from the very beginning, from the quiet, ordinary house where he grew up, and the strange accident that changed his life, all the way through his long and eventful years, through his griefs and his joys, through his battles and his quiet, ordinary evenings, through the great weights he lifted and the great losses he bore, and the small kindnesses he did in the dark that no one ever knew about. And along the way we will meet the people who filled his life, the gentle aunt and uncle who raised him, the loves he found and the loves he lost, the friends who stood beside him and the enemies who set themselves against him, some of them wicked and some of them only lost. And through all of it, we will follow the one steady thread that runs through everything, the good and stubborn heart of the young hero himself, trying, always, through everything, to do the right thing. And you need not worry about keeping any of it straight, for it does not matter in the least whether you remember which story is which, or who is who, or what happened when. These are not stories to be studied or remembered, but only to be drifted through, gently, like a slow, warm river. And if the people and the events all blur softly together into one long, gentle dream, that is not a failure, but exactly the point, exactly what these quiet stories are for, and exactly the soft and shapeless place from which the sweetest sleep so often comes. and there is no right way to listen to these stories, and no wrong way either. You may follow them closely if you like, or you may let them blur softly at the edges and drift in and out of them as you please, catching a phrase here and a phrase there, and letting the rest wash gently past. You may keep your eyes open for a while, watching the dark, or you may let them fall closed at once. You may lie on your back, or curl on your side, or burrow deep beneath the blankets, however you are most comfortable, however your body most wants to rest. There is nothing to get right, nothing to keep up with, nothing at all that is asked of you tonight but to be comfortable and to grow drowsy and to let yourself, little by little, drift down towards sleep. And so settle in now, however you like, and make yourself as comfortable as you can, and let the long, gentle night begin. So there is nothing for you to do now, nothing at all, but let yourself grow comfortable, and let your eyes fall closed whenever they wish to, and let my voice become a small and steady thread running quietly through the dark. A thread you may follow as far as you like, and then let go of whenever sleep comes to take you. You do not have to reach the end. You do not have to stay awake for any of it. If you drift away in the middle of a story, that is exactly as it should be, and the story will keep on unfolding gently in the dark, whether you are there to hear it or not, and will still be here, waiting, if you ever wish to return. So let us begin, slowly and softly, and let the great bright city rise up around us in the warm dark of the imagination, and let the first story start. Let us begin, as so many of these stories begin, in a small and ordinary house on a quiet street in one of the outer boroughs of the great city. A modest house with a small square of garden and a porch with a step worn smooth by years of feet, the kind of house where nothing extraordinary is ever supposed to happen. And in that house there lived a boy, a thin and bookish and rather lonely boy, an orphan raised from his earliest years by his aunt and his uncle, two of the gentlest and kindest people in all the old stories, an aging couple with silver hair and soft voices who had taken the boy in when he was very small and had loved him ever since, as though he were their own son. The uncle was a warm and easy man, full of small jokes and old sayings and quiet wisdom, and the aunt was a frail and tender woman with a heart so large it seemed almost too big for her small frame, and between the two of them they had made that modest little house into a place of great and abiding love. The boy himself was clever, cleverer by far than most of the young people around him, quick with science and numbers and all the workings of the natural world, and he spent his hours bent over his books and his experiments, happiest when he was learning something new about the way the universe was put together. But he was shy too, and awkward, and unsure of himself in the ways that clever, quiet boys so often are, and at the school he attended he was not popular, was in fact rather lonely, teased sometimes by the louder and more confident young people, left out of their games and their gatherings, so that he often felt himself to be on the outside of things, looking in, a watcher rather than a part of the crowd. And yet he bore this well enough, for he had his aunt and his uncle and his books, and he was not an unhappy boy, only a quiet one, only a boy who had not yet found his place in the world. And then, one day, on a school outing to a laboratory where scientists were doing experiments with radiation, something happened that would change the whole course of the boy's life. For among the exhibits, unnoticed by anyone, a small spider had drifted down into the path of the strange radiation and had been changed by it, filled with a power that no ordinary spider had ever carried, and as the boy stood watching the demonstration, lost in his own thoughts, this small changed spider descended on its thread and settled, for just a moment, upon the back of his hand and bit him. It was a small thing, a tiny sting, hardly worth noticing, and the boy brushed the spider away and thought no more of it. And the spider, its strange work done, crept away and died. But in that small and almost unnoticed moment, the whole of the boy's life had quietly turned, and nothing afterward would ever be quite the same. For the strange power that had filled the spider now began to fill the boy as well, spreading through him slowly as he made his way home from the laboratory, so that he began to feel strange and dizzy and unlike himself, his senses swimming, his body humming with something he could not name. And as he walked, lost and unsteady, a car came rushing toward him, and before he had even had time to think, his body moved on its own, leaping up and away with an ease and a lightness that astonished him, carrying him high into the air and onto the wall of a nearby building, where his fingers, to his amazement, clung to the sheer brick as though they had been made for it. And he clung there, high above the street, his heart pounding, staring at his own hands, understanding slowly and with a rising wonder that something had happened to him, something impossible, something that had filled him with a strength and an agility and a sureness far beyond anything a boy his age had any right to possess. And so the boy spent the days that followed discovering, one by one, the strange new gifts that the spider's bite had given him. He found that he was strong now, far stronger than he looked, strong enough to lift great weights and bend thick steel as though it were soft wire. He found that he was quick, quicker than the eye could follow, able to dodge and leap and tumble with the ease of an acrobat. He found that he could cling to any surface, could walk up walls and across ceilings as easily as other people walked across a floor. And he found, strangest of all, that he had somehow gained a kind of warning sense, a small quiet tingling at the back of his mind that woke whenever danger was near, so that he seemed almost to know, before it happened, when something was about to go wrong. He was, in short, no longer an ordinary boy at all, but something new and remarkable. And as he came slowly to understand the scope of what had happened to him, his first thought, being a boy after all, was not of duty or of others but of himself, and of what these wonderful new gifts might do for him. For he was clever, this boy, and it did not take him long to see how such gifts might be turned to his advantage, how a boy with the strength of many men and the agility of a spider might make a name for himself, and better still, might make some money, which his aging aunt and uncle badly needed, for they were poor and getting poorer, and the boy had long wished that he might somehow help them. And so, with the cleverness that had always been his, he set about turning his strange new gifts into a kind of act, a performance, a way of earning. He designed himself a costume, a bright, close-fitting suit of red and blue, patterned all over with the web of a spider, and topped with a full mask that hid his face entirely, so that no one would know the shy, quiet boy beneath. And, being a genius with science, he built himself as well a pair of small, clever devices that he wore on his wrists, devices that could shoot out strong, thin strands of a sticky web-like fluid of his own invention, so that he might swing through the air on these lines and catch and bind whatever he wished. And thus disguised and equipped, he went out into the world to seek his fortune. And at first, it must be said, the boy sought only his own glory and his own gain. He put himself forward as a performer, a masked wonder, a spectacle, and he was an immediate sensation, for the crowds had never seen anything like him, this masked figure who could leap and cling and perform feats of impossible strength and agility. And money began to come to him, and a small fame, and he was, for a little while, purely and simply delighted with himself, and with the wonderful thing that had happened to him. He thought only of his act, and his growing fame, and the money he was earning, and he gave no thought at all to any larger purpose that his gifts might serve, for he was young, and he had been lonely and overlooked for so long, and it was sweet, so sweet, to be admired at last, even if it was only a masked figure that they admired, and not the boy himself. And it was this self-absorption, this thinking only of himself, that led the boy to the great mistake of his life, the mistake that would shape everything that came after, and that would turn him, in the end, from a selfish boy into a selfless hero. For one evening, after a performance, as he was leaving the television studio where he had been appearing, a thief came running past him, a man who had just robbed the studio's office and was fleeing with the stolen money, pursued by a security guard who called out to the boy to stop him, and the boy, who could have stopped the fleeing thief with the greatest of ease, with no more than a flick of his hand, simply stood aside and let the man run past, let him escape into the waiting elevator and away. And when the guard, astonished and angry, demanded to know why the boy had not stopped the thief when he so easily could have, the boy answered, carelessly and coldly, that it was not his job, that catching thieves was the guard's business and the police's business, and none of his own, that he looked out for himself now, and let the rest of the world look out for itself. And with that he turned and walked away, thinking no more about it, pleased with his own cleverness, imagining that he had been wonderfully sharp and independent, not knowing, not dreaming, what that one careless choice would cost him. For a few days later, the boy came home to find the street outside his house full of police cars, their lights turning, and a terrible cold fear closed around his heart, and he ran inside to find his aunt weeping, and the news, the impossible news, the news that would break him. His uncle, his gentle, warm uncle, the man who had been like a father to him, had been shot, had been killed, murdered in his own home by a burglar who had broken in. And the boy, wild with grief and rage, still in his ordinary clothes, ran back out into the night and put on his mask and went hunting for the killer, following the reports on the police radio to an old abandoned warehouse where the murderer had fled and cornered himself. And the boy went into that dark warehouse and found the man and fought him, and it was no fight at all, for the boy with his strange gifts overpowered the frightened burglar in a matter of moments and dragged him into the light to see his face. And when he saw the man's face, the whole world fell out from under him, for he knew that face. It was the face of the thief from the television studio, the very thief he had let run past him, the thief he could so easily have stopped and had not, because it was not his job, because he looked out for himself now, because he looked out for himself. And in that terrible moment, in that dark warehouse, with the murderer of his uncle at his feet, and the understanding crashing down upon him that his own carelessness, his own selfishness, had let this killer go free to take the life of the person he loved most in all the world, the boy learned, all at once and forever, the lesson that would shape the whole of his life to come. He understood, with a clarity that would never leave him, that his strange gifts were not merely his own to use for his own gain, that a person given great power is not free to think only of himself, that with such power there comes, whether one wishes it or not, a great and inescapable responsibility, a duty to use one's gifts for others, to protect the weak, to prevent the harm one has the power to prevent. He understood that if he had only acted, only used his gifts to stop a fleeing thief when it cost him nothing to do so, his uncle would still be alive. And he understood that he could never, as long as he lived, allow such a thing to happen again, could never again stand aside and let harm be done when he had the power to prevent it, that he must spend his life, from this night forward, using his gifts not for himself but for others, in payment of a debt that could never truly be repaid. And so the boy stumbled out of that warehouse a different person than he had gone in, no longer a selfish performer seeking his own glory, but something new, something that would go on for the rest of his long life, a protector, a guardian, a masked figure who would swing out night after night into the dangerous city, not for money and not for fame, but simply to help, to catch the falling, to stop the wicked, to be there when he was needed. His uncle's death had broken his heart, and would go on breaking it, quietly, for all the years to come, for the guilt of it never entirely left him, the knowledge that he might have prevented it, and this guilt became a kind of engine in him, driving him out again and again into danger, driving him to help even when he was exhausted, even when it cost him everything, driving him always to try to do the right thing. And the words that had come to him in that dark warehouse became the creed of his whole life, the quiet promise he made to himself and never broke, that with great power there must also come great responsibility. And there is something in that, something deep and true and worth resting on for a moment as you lie here in the dark, drifting slowly towards sleep, in the way the young hero's whole life was built upon a single act of failure, a single selfish choice, and the terrible grief that followed from it. For it would have been easy, so easy, for a boy who had suffered such a loss to grow bitter and hard and cruel, to blame the world, to close his heart. But this boy did not. He took his grief and his guilt, and he turned them into something good, into a lifelong promise to protect others, into a kindness so deep and so stubborn that it would carry him through every trial the years could throw at him. And that, perhaps, more than any of his strange gifts, is what made him a hero, not the strength, and not the agility, and not the power to cling to walls, but the choice, made in the depths of his grief, to spend his life in the service of others. And that choice is a gentle thing to hold on to now, in the quiet, as the first story settles and grows still, the thought of a broken-hearted boy who chose, against all the ease of bitterness, to be good. So let us leave the young hero there, at the very beginning of his long, strange journey, standing on a rooftop above the great glittering city in his red and blue, looking out over the millions of lights and the endless streets, knowing now what his life must be, feeling the weight of his new promise settling onto his young shoulders, a weight he would carry for the rest of his days. The city spreads out below him, vast and beautiful and full of trouble, and he stands at its edge, a small caped figure against the enormous night, ready to begin. And we may leave him there for now, and let that first story grow quiet and soft, and move on, gently, to another, for the night is long, and there are many stories still to tell, and you have all the time in the world to drift and rest, and let them carry you down. Let us turn now to a different kind of story, a quieter and more inward one, a story not about how the young hero got his gifts, but about the great and secret cost of carrying them, the weariness and the loneliness, and the constant grinding difficulty of living a double life. For it is one thing to become a hero in a single dramatic night, and quite another to go on being one, day after day and year after year, when the excitement has faded and the duty remains, when the hero is tired and overworked and pulled in 100 directions and would like, more than anything, simply to rest. And there came a time, some years into the young hero's career, when the weight of it all grew almost too heavy to bear, and he came very close to setting it down entirely. And it is that time, that low and weary season of his life, that this next story tells. For you must understand that the young hero's life, beneath the mask, was not an easy one, was in fact a life of almost constant struggle. He was still young, still trying to make his way in the world, still poor, still caring for his frail, aging aunt, who needed him, and who worried about him, and who must never, ever be allowed to know the dangerous secret life he led, for the fear of it, he was certain, would break her fragile heart. He was trying to finish his education, to keep up with his studies, and struggling, for how could anyone keep up with their studies when they spent half of every night swinging through the city catching criminals? He was trying to earn a living, taking photographs of his own masked exploits and selling them to a newspaper whose blustering editor, ironically, hated the masked hero and printed terrible things about him, so that the young man was in the strange position of earning his bread by selling pictures that were used to slander him, and he was trying, in what little time remained, to have some sort of ordinary life, some friendships, some happiness, and finding it almost impossible, for the demands of his secret life were always calling him away, always making him break his promises, always making him seem, to the people who did not know his secret, unreliable and strange and rude. And the worst of it, the very worst, was the way his heroism was so often repaid not with gratitude, but with suspicion and fear and outright hatred. For the great newspaper, with its blustering editor, had turned much of the city against the masked hero, painting him as a menace, a threat, a masked vigilante of doubtful motives, so that a great many ordinary people, the very people he risked his life to protect, regarded him with fear and mistrust, and some even with hatred. He would save a life and be rewarded with screams and thrown stones. He would stop a crime and find himself blamed for it. He would give everything he had, night after night, exhaust himself, endanger himself, sacrifice his own happiness and his own future, all to protect a city that, as often as not, seemed to despise him for his trouble. And this, more than any villain, more than any danger, was what wore him down. The terrible thanklessness of it, the way he poured out his whole life in the service of people who feared and hated him for it. And so there came a day, after a long and especially difficult season, a season of too many battles and too little sleep, and too much loss, and too much thanklessness, when the young hero simply reached the end of what he could bear. He was worn down to nothing, exhausted in body and in spirit, and everywhere he turned his double life seemed to be falling apart. His studies were suffering, his aunt was ill and needed him, the girl he cared for felt neglected and was slipping away from him, the newspaper was slandering him more viciously than ever, and he was so tired, so bone-deep weary of the endless struggle, of giving and receiving only fear and hatred in return, that he began to ask himself, for the first time, why he did it at all. Why should he sacrifice everything, his happiness, his youth, his very life, for a city that hated him? Why should he carry this crushing burden when no one had asked him to, when no one even wanted him to, when he might simply set it down and be free, and live at last like an ordinary young man, with an ordinary life and ordinary happiness? And in his weariness and his doubt, standing one night atop a building in his red and blue, he made a decision. He would give it up. He would stop. He was only a man, after all, only a tired young man who had given more than anyone could reasonably be asked to give, and he had the right, surely, to a life of his own. And so, in a moment that has become one of the most famous images in all the old stories, he took off his mask, and he peeled off his costume, and he threw the whole of it, the red and blue suit and the mask and everything it stood for, into a trash can in a dark alley, and he walked away from it, walked away from the whole crushing burden of his heroism, and set out to be, at last, simply himself, simply an ordinary young man with an ordinary life ahead of him. And for a little while, a strange and giddy little while, he felt free, wonderfully free, lighter than he had felt in years, as though a great stone had been lifted from his chest. And oh, how sweet that freedom was, for a time. For the first time in years, the young man had his life to himself. He could study without being called away. He could spend time with the girl he cared for. He could walk the streets like anyone else, with no burden, no duty, no danger, no endless grinding responsibility pulling at him. He could sleep through the night. He could be young. He could be ordinary. And he told himself that he was happy, that he had made the right choice, that he had given enough and more than enough, and that no one could blame him for wanting, at last, a life of his own. And there is a truth in that, a real truth, and it is worth pausing on it gently here in the dark, for we all of us, sometimes, grow weary of our burdens, weary of the endless demands of duty and care, and long simply to set them down and be free. And there is no shame in that longing, no shame at all. It is one of the most human of all feelings, the longing to be free of one's responsibilities, and the young hero felt it as deeply as anyone ever has. But the young man was who he was, and his heart was what it was, and it did not take very long for him to discover that he could not, in truth, simply walk away, for his gifts had not left him, and his warning sense still woke whenever danger was near, and everywhere he went he saw trouble that he had the power to prevent, saw people in danger that he had the power to save, and every time he turned away, every time he told himself that it was no longer his business, he heard again, faint and insistent in the back of his mind, the lesson of that long ago night in the warehouse, the knowledge that with great power there comes great responsibility, the knowledge that if he stood aside and let harm be done when he had the power to prevent it, he would be, once again, the boy who let the thief run past, the boy whose selfishness had cost his uncle's life. And that, he found, he could not bear. The freedom he had thought so sweet turned slowly to ash in his mouth, for it was a freedom bought at the price of turning away from people who needed him, and that was a price his good heart simply could not pay. And so the matter came to its head, as such matters do, on a single fateful night. For the young man, walking home, happened to pass by an old building where an elderly night watchman was being menaced by a burglar, and the young man saw it, and his warning sense woke, and every instinct in him cried out to help. And though he was no longer wearing the mask, though he had thrown all of that away, he could not stand aside, could not let an old man be harmed when he had the power to prevent it, and so he acted, and stopped the burglar, and saved the old watchman's life. And afterward, as he stood there in the dark, an ordinary young man in ordinary clothes who had just saved a life out of nothing but the goodness of his heart, he understood, at last and completely, that there was no walking away, that there had never been any walking away, that he was who he was and could not be otherwise, that the gift he had been given was not a burden he could choose to set down, but a part of who he was, woven into the very fabric of his heart. He could no more stop being a protector than he could stop breathing. And so he went back. He went back to the dark alley where he had thrown away his costume, and he searched through the trash until he found it, the red and blue suit and the mask, and he took it up again, and he put it back on, and he became once more the masked hero he had tried to leave behind. But he was not now the same as he had been, for he had chosen it, this time, chosen it freely, with his eyes open, knowing exactly what it would cost him, knowing the weariness and the thanklessness and the endless struggle that lay ahead, and choosing it anyway, choosing to be a hero not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because it was who he was, because his good heart would not let him be anything else. And there is a great strength in that, a deeper strength than any the spider's bite had given him, the strength of a person who has looked squarely at the full cost of their duty and chosen to bear it anyway, freely and with open eyes. He had tried to walk away and had found that he could not, and in the finding, he had become more truly a hero than he had ever been before. And it is a gentle and a comforting thing to rest on, that story, as you lie here in the quiet, drifting towards sleep. The story of the hero who grew weary and set down his burden and then took it up again, freely, out of love. For it tells us something kind and true about the nature of duty and of goodness, that the truest goodness is not the goodness that has never known weariness or doubt, but the goodness that has felt the full weight of its burden, has longed to set it down, has even, for a little while, set it down, and has then, knowing everything, chosen to take it up again. The young hero was never stronger, never braver, never more truly good than in the moment when he went back to that dark alley and picked his costume up out of the trash. And you may hold that thought softly now, as the story fades, the image of the weary young man choosing, freely and with love, to go on being good, and let it comfort you, and let it carry you a little further down into the warm and waiting dark. So let us leave that story too, now, and let it grow quiet, the story of the burden set down and taken up again, and let us drift on, slowly, to another. For the night is still young, and you are only beginning to grow drowsy, and there is no hurry at all, and I will keep telling these old gentle stories for as long as you need them, one after another, softly, in the dark, until sleep comes at last to carry you away, and you need not follow them closely, and you need not stay awake, and you may let go whenever you wish, and drift, and rest. Now let me tell you what many people believe to be the finest of all the young heroes' stories, a story of a single terrible trial and a single impossible feat of will, a story that people have loved and remembered for a very long time, because it shows, better than almost any other, the deep, unbreakable strength that lived at the very center of the young hero's heart. And though it is a story of danger and of struggle, it is at its heart a hopeful story, a story about never giving up, and you may listen to it, if you like, not as a tale of peril, but as a kind of quiet promise, a promise that even when everything seems lost, even when the weight upon us seems more than any person could possibly bear, there is within us a strength we do not know we have, waiting to be called upon. And that is a fine thing to drift towards sleep upon, the thought of the strength that waits within. It began, this story, with the young hero's aunt, his frail and beloved aunt, falling gravely ill. She had always been fragile, the aunt, delicate and easily tired, and now she had fallen sick with something serious, something that threatened her very life, and the young hero was frantic with worry, for she was the last of his family, the person he loved most in all the world, the gentle woman who had raised him and whom he had sworn to protect. The doctors did what they could, but her condition grew worse, and it seemed that she might not survive, and the young hero could do nothing but sit by her bedside and hold her frail hand and feel the terrible helplessness of watching someone he loved slip slowly away. And there is no one who has not known something of that helplessness, that terrible sitting by, that longing to do something, anything, to save someone we love, and the young hero felt it as deeply as anyone ever has. But then a thread of hope appeared, for it was discovered that the aunt's illness was connected, in a strange and roundabout way, to the young hero's own blood, to something in the strange changed blood that the spider's bite had given him, which had passed, through an accident, into her, and it was determined that there might be a cure, a special serum, a rare and difficult medicine that might save her life, if only it could be obtained in time. And the young hero threw himself into the search for this medicine with all the desperate energy of his love, moving heaven and earth to find it, following every lead, calling in every favor, until at last he traced it to its source, to a quantity of the rare serum that was needed to save his aunt's life. But the serum, as it happened, had fallen into the hands of a criminal, a brilliant and ruthless master criminal who was gathering rare and valuable things for his own dark purposes, and who had no intention of giving up the one thing that could save the dying woman's life. And so the young hero was forced to fight for it, to hunt down the criminal and his gang, to track them to their secret underground lair, a great hidden complex built deep beneath the river, and to battle his way through them, one after another, in his desperate race against time. For his aunt was dying, and every hour mattered, and the serum was the only thing that could save her, and he fought his way down, deeper and deeper into the underground lair, until at last he came face to face with the master criminal himself, and they fought, a terrible fight, and in the course of it, the whole vast underground structure was damaged and began to give way, and the young hero, in the chaos and the collapse, was caught, pinned down beneath a great mass of fallen machinery and steel and rubble, an enormous crushing weight that came down upon his shoulders and his back and pressed him down against the floor, trapping him utterly, so that he could not move, could not rise, could not escape. And there he was then, at the very lowest point of the whole story, pinned beneath an impossible weight, deep underground, with the water of the river beginning to leak in around him, and the precious serum, the serum that alone could save his dying aunt's life, resting on a shelf just a little way off, just out of his reach, so near and yet so utterly beyond him. And the weight upon him was enormous, far more than any ordinary person could ever hope to lift, tons upon tons of fallen steel and machinery, pressing him down, crushing the breath from his body, and he was exhausted already from the long fight, and injured and alone, with no one to help him and no hope of rescue, and the water rising, and his aunt dying, and the whole thing seemed, in that moment, entirely and completely hopeless. It seemed that he must simply give up, must accept that he could not move, that the weight was too great, that he had failed, that his aunt would die, and he would die there in the dark beneath the river, crushed and drowned and beaten at last. And for a moment, a long dark moment, it seemed that he would give up. For the weight was so great and he was so tired, and it seemed so utterly impossible that any person could ever lift such a mass. And a kind of despair began to close around his heart. The despair of a person who has finally met a burden greater than they can bear. And he thought, lying there in the dark beneath the crushing weight, that perhaps this was the end. Perhaps this was where his long struggle finished. Perhaps he had simply come, at last, to something he could not overcome. And who could blame him for such a thought? Pinned beneath tons of steel, with the water rising, exhausted and alone, it would have been the most natural thing in the world simply to give up, to let go, to accept defeat. But then he thought of his aunt. He thought of the frail, gentle woman lying in her hospital bed, dying, waiting, needing the serum that lay just out of his reach. He thought of how she had raised him, how she had loved him, how she was the last of his family and the person he loved most in all the world. He thought of his uncle, too, and the promise he had made in that long-ago warehouse, the promise to use his gifts to protect the people he loved, to never again stand aside and let harm come to them when he had the power to prevent it. And he thought that if he gave up now, if he let the weight defeat him, then his aunt would die, and he would have failed her, failed the last of his family, failed in the one duty that mattered most of all. And something rose up in him then, something deeper than exhaustion, deeper than despair, deeper even than the crushing weight of the steel, a great and desperate refusal, a refusal to give up, a refusal to fail the person he loved. And he began, against all hope, against all reason, to push. And it is this moment, that people have remembered and loved for so long, the image of the young hero pinned beneath the impossible weight, summoning up from the very depths of his being a strength he did not know he had, and beginning, slowly, agonizingly, to lift. At first, nothing moved. The weight was too great, and his strength seemed as nothing against it, and every muscle in his body screamed, and the steel pressed down, and it seemed that he could not, that no one could. But he thought of his aunt, and he pushed, and he thought of his promise, and he pushed, and he thought of everyone who had ever needed him, and he pushed, and slowly, slowly, impossibly, the great weight began to shift. A fraction of an inch, then a little more. His body shaking, his muscles tearing, his breath coming in great ragged gasps, he pushed against the impossible, and the impossible, slowly, began to give way. And he lifted it. Against all hope, against all reason, against the plain hard facts of what a body can and cannot do, the young hero lifted the enormous weight, rising up beneath it inch by agonizing inch, his whole body one single scream of effort and will, until at last, with a final tremendous heave that seemed to draw on some deep reserve of strength that lived beyond the body altogether, in the will and the heart and the love, he threw the great mass off of himself and rose to his feet, free. And he stood there, swaying, gasping, half dead with the effort, but free and unbroken and unbeaten, having done the impossible thing, having lifted the weight that could not be lifted, because he would not, could not, give up, because someone he loved was depending on him, because his heart was stronger than any steel. And he took up the serum, then the precious serum that would save his aunt's life, and he made his way up out of the flooding lair and back into the light, and he brought the medicine to his aunt in time, and she was saved, and she lived, because he had refused to give up. And there is so much in that story, so much to rest upon gently in the dark as you drift towards sleep, that it is hard to know what to hold on to first. But perhaps the deepest thing, the truest thing, is this: that the young hero's greatest strength was never really in his muscles at all, never really in the gift the spider had given him, but in his heart, in his love, in his refusal to give up on the people who needed him. For many people are strong, and many people can lift great weights, but the strength that lifts the impossible weight, the strength that rises up from beneath the crushing mass when all hope is gone, that strength comes from somewhere deeper than the body, comes from love, comes from the deep, unbreakable refusal to fail the people we love. And that strength lives in all of us, in you as much as in the young hero, waiting quietly for the moment it is needed. And it is a comforting thing to know that it is there, that when the weight comes down, as it comes down on all of us sometimes, there is within us a strength we do not know we have, waiting to lift it. So let that be the thought you carry as this story fades, the thought of the young hero rising up beneath the impossible weight, unbeaten, because he would not give up, and the knowledge that the same strength lives quietly in you, waiting. And let the story grow soft now, and grow still, and let us drift on, gently, to another. For you are growing drowsy now, I think, and that is good, and there is no need to stay awake, no need to follow, only to rest and drift, and let the quiet stories carry you down. Let me tell you now a stranger story, a story of a shadow that fell over the young hero for a time, a darkness that came to him from somewhere out beyond the stars and clung to him and tried to make him into something he was not. For there came a time when the young hero found himself, through a strange series of events, far from home, caught up in a great gathering of heroes on a distant and alien world. And in the course of his adventures, there he came upon what he took to be a machine that would mend his torn costume, and he used it, and out of the machine there flowed instead a strange black substance, a living liquid darkness that flowed over him and covered him entirely, and became, to his surprise and his delight, a new costume, a sleek black costume marked with a single bold white spider that seemed to move and flow with his thoughts and to serve his every need. And at first, the young hero was delighted with his strange new black costume, for it seemed a wonderful thing. It was strong, and it was sleek, and it responded to his slightest wish, forming itself into whatever shape he needed. It could produce its own webbing, endlessly, so that he no longer needed his little wrist devices. It could disguise itself as ordinary clothing at a thought, so that he need never again struggle to change in and out of his costume. It seemed to make him stronger and quicker, and it seemed to know, somehow, what he wanted before he wanted it. And the young hero, who had struggled and scraped and made do for so long, who had patched his old costume 100 times and built his web devices with his own hands out of nothing, was delighted to have, at last, a costume that seemed to do everything for him, that seemed almost too good to be true. But it was too good to be true, as such things so often are, for the strange black costume was not a costume at all, but a living thing, a creature from beyond the stars, a thing that fed and lived upon the body of whoever wore it, and it had chosen the young hero, and it did not intend to let him go. And slowly, so slowly that at first he did not notice, the young hero began to change. He began to grow tired in a way he could not explain, waking exhausted each morning as though he had not slept at all. He began to feel strange and dark and unlike himself, filled with feelings that were not his own, angers and hungers that did not belong to his gentle heart. And he began, worst of all, to do things in the night that he did not remember, For while he slept, the living costume would take his sleeping body and carry it out into the night, out into the city, to do the costume's own dark work, so that the young hero woke each morning more tired than before, not knowing where he had been or what he had done, a prisoner in his own sleeping body. And when at last he came to understand what was happening to him, that his wonderful new costume was in truth a living parasite that was slowly taking him over, feeding on him, wearing him down, trying to bind itself to him forever and make him into something dark and not himself, the young hero was filled with horror, and he resolved to be rid of it, to tear the thing off of himself and cast it away. But that, he found, was easier resolved than done, for the living darkness did not want to be cast away, and it clung to him and fought him, and when he tried to remove it, it would flow back over him, covering him again, refusing to let go, for it had come to love him in its strange alien way, had come to need him, and it could not understand why he would want to be free of it, when it had given him so much, when it had served him so faithfully, when it wanted only to be with him always. And there is something almost sad in that, in the living darkness that loved the young hero and could not understand his wish to be free, and we will come back to that sadness, for it matters, later on. But first the young hero had to find a way to be free of the thing, and it was not easy, for it clung to him with all its strange strength and would not let go. And in his desperation he remembered, at last, a thing he had noticed about the creature, a weakness, for he had observed that the living darkness could not bear loud sound, that it flinched and shrank from great noise, that it was hurt and weakened by it. And so he made his way, fighting the creature's will with every step, to the top of a great bell tower, a church tower with an enormous bell, and there, as the creature clung to him and fought him and pleaded with him in its wordless way to stay, he set the great bell ringing and ringing and ringing, filling the whole tower with a sound so vast and so overwhelming that the living darkness could not bear it, and the creature writhed and shrank and weakened, and at last, in agony, it was driven off of him, torn away by the terrible sound, and it flowed away from him and pooled upon the floor of the bell tower, weakened and hurt and defeated, and the young hero, free at last, exhausted and shaking, made his way down out of the tower and away, rid of the darkness, himself again. And that might have been the end of it, but here is the part of the story that is truly worth resting upon, the part that gives it its deep and quiet sadness. For as the young hero was being freed of the creature, in those last moments before the great bell drove it off, the creature did a strange and selfless thing. For the young hero, weakened by the struggle, had fallen and lay helpless, and in that moment, the living darkness, even as the terrible sound was destroying it, flowed out and shielded him, protected him, used the last of its strength not to save itself, but to save him, the one it loved. And then it was driven away, and left behind, alone and defeated in the empty tower, abandoned by the one creature in all the universe that it had loved. And though it was a monster, and though it had tried to take the young hero over and make him into something dark, there is a real sorrow in that, in the living thing that loved and was abandoned, that gave its last strength to protect the one who was casting it away. For the living darkness, cast off and abandoned, did not die, but crept away into the shadows of the city to nurse its wounds and its sorrow, over time, curdled into something bitter, into a terrible hatred, a hatred of the young hero who had abandoned it. And it found, in time, another host, another person to bind itself to, a person who also hated the young hero, and the two of them together, the bitter man and the bitter creature, became one of the young hero's darkest and most dangerous enemies, a twisted shadow self, a dark mirror born of love turned to hate. But that is another story, a story for another night perhaps, and we need not follow it into its darkness now. For tonight it is enough to rest on the strange, sad tale of the living darkness that came to the young hero from beyond the stars, that served him and loved him and tried to keep him, and that he had, in the end, to cast away, in order to remain himself. And there is a gentle wisdom in that story too, if we look for it, a wisdom worth holding on to as you drift towards sleep. For the living darkness was, in its way, a kind of temptation, a promise of ease, of power without effort, of a life in which everything was done for us and nothing was required of us. And it is a promise that comes to all of us, in one form or another, the promise of the easy path, the effortless way. But the young hero learned, as we all must learn, that such promises are not to be trusted, that a thing which offers to do everything for us and asks nothing in return is often a thing that means, in the end, to take everything from us, to feed upon us, to make us into something less than ourselves. And he learned that it was better, far better, to bear his own burdens, to build his own web devices with his own hands, to patch his own worn costume, to remain himself, small and struggling and free, than to give himself over to the easy darkness that would have carried him, but would also, in time, have consumed him. And that is a good and steadying thought to rest upon, the thought that it is better to bear our own burdens and remain ourselves than to give ourselves over to any easy darkness, however sweet its promises. So let that story fade now too, the strange, sad story of the living darkness, and let it grow soft and quiet, and let us move on, gently, into the deeper part of the night. For you are growing drowsier now, I can tell, and the stories are beginning to blur softly together, the origin and the burden and the impossible weight and the living darkness, all of them melting into one long, gentle dream. And that is exactly as it should be. You need not keep them separate. You need not remember which is which. You need only let them wash over you, one after another, like slow warm waves, and drift, and rest, and sink a little deeper with each one, down toward the deep and quiet sleep that is waiting for you. Now I am going to tell you a sadder story, one of the saddest in all the young hero's long life, and I want you to know, before I begin, that I will tell it very gently, very softly, the way one tells a sad old story to someone one is trying to comfort, so that the sorrow of it becomes only a quiet and distant sadness, a gentle grief, nothing that could trouble your rest or keep you from your sleep. For it is a story about loss, about the loss of someone the young hero loved very much, and loss is a part of every life, and there is a strange comfort, sometimes, in sitting quietly with an old sorrow, in letting it be soft and gentle and far away, in remembering that grief, however deep, is a part of love, and that even the saddest stories can be held tenderly and set down gently and made peace with. So do not be afraid of the sadness in this one. Let it be soft, let it be gentle, let it wash over you like a slow grey rain and pass and leave you at peace. In those days the young hero was in love, deeply and truly in love, with a young woman, a bright and lovely and gentle young woman with long fair hair, who was, everyone agreed, the great love of his young life. She was kind, and she was clever, and she was beautiful, and she loved the young man beneath the mask, loved him for himself, for his goodness and his gentleness and his good heart, and he loved her in return with all the depth of his young and earnest soul. They had been through a great deal together, the two of them, joy and sorrow both, and they had come to a place of deep and settled love, the kind of love that a young person builds their whole future upon. And the young hero, for all the troubles of his double life, was happier in those days than he had ever been, for he had found, at last, someone to share his life with, someone who loved him, someone who made all the weariness and the thanklessness of his heroism seem worth bearing. But the young hero had enemies, as heroes do, and the darkest and most terrible of all his enemies was a man twisted by madness and hatred, a brilliant and wealthy man whose mind had been broken and turned to evil, who flew through the air on a strange glider, and who had made it his life's dark purpose to destroy the young hero utterly. And this enemy had discovered, somehow, the young hero's most precious secret, had learned who he was beneath the mask, and knowing this, knowing the young hero's heart, this terrible enemy understood that the surest way to destroy him was not to attack his body, but to attack his heart, to take from him the person he loved most in all the world. And so, on a dark and terrible night, the enemy came for the young woman with the long fair hair, and seized her, and carried her away up to the top of a great bridge that spanned the river, a high and dizzying place of steel and cable far above the dark water, and there he waited, knowing that the young hero would come. And the young hero came, of course, for he had discovered that his beloved had been taken, and he was frantic with fear for her, and he raced through the night to the great bridge, his heart pounding, and there he found them, the terrible enemy on his glider, and his beloved held captive at the very top of the bridge, high above the water. And a battle began, a desperate battle high on the swaying heights of the great bridge, the young hero fighting with everything he had to reach his beloved and to save her, the enemy fighting to destroy him. And in the chaos and the fury of that battle, the terrible thing happened, the thing that would break the young hero's heart forever. For the enemy, seeing that he was losing, seeing that the young hero might yet win, did a last cruel thing, and cast the young woman down from the top of the bridge, sent her falling, down through the dark air toward the black water far below. And the young hero saw her fall, and his heart stopped, and he flung himself after her, shooting out a line of his web, a long, desperate line, reaching down through the dark to catch her before she could reach the water. And the line found her, and caught her, and for one moment, one single flashing moment, it seemed that he had saved her, that he had caught his beloved out of the air, as he had caught so many falling people before, that all would be well. But it was not well, for the fall had been too far and too fast, and the sudden catch, the sudden stop at the end of the long line, had been too sharp, and in that moment, in the catching that was meant to save her, the young woman was lost. And when the young hero drew her up to him, up onto the bridge, and held her in his arms, he found that she was gone, that his beloved, the great love of his young life, had died, in the very fall from which he had tried so desperately to save her. And I will not dwell on the young hero's grief, for it was too deep and too terrible to dwell upon, and this is a story to soothe you towards sleep, not to wound you. But you must know that it broke him, this loss, broke his heart in a way that never entirely healed, for she had been the great love of his young life, and she was gone, and he had been there, had tried to save her, had almost saved her, and had failed, in the space of a single terrible instant. And the guilt of it, the terrible question of whether he might have saved her, whether he might have done something differently, whether it was somehow his fault, haunted him for years and years. as such questions haunt all those who have lost someone they loved and wondered ever after if they might have done something to prevent it. For that is the cruelest part of grief. So often, not only the loss itself, but the endless questioning that follows it, the if only, the what if, the terrible turning over and over of the last moments, searching for the thing one might have done. But here is the thing about that grief, the thing that matters, the thing worth resting on gently as you lie here in the dark. For the young hero did not let his grief destroy him. It would have been easy, so easy, for a young man who had suffered such a loss to be broken by it entirely, to grow bitter and hard and hopeless, to give up on love and on goodness and on life. But he did not. He grieved, deeply and truly and for a long, long time, for she was worth grieving, and grief is the price of love, and he did not run from it or deny it, but let himself feel it fully, the whole terrible weight of it. And then, slowly, over the long years, he carried it. He did not get over it, exactly, for one does not get over such a loss, not truly, not ever. But he learned to carry it, to hold it, to let it become a part of him, a deep and tender sorrow woven into the fabric of his heart, and to go on, to keep living, to keep loving, to keep being the good and gentle person he had always been, carrying his grief with him, but not letting it turn him hard or cold or cruel. And in time, though he never forgot her, though he carried the sorrow of her loss all the rest of his life, the young hero found that he could love again, that his heart, though broken, was not destroyed, that there was still room in it for joy, for tenderness, for new love. And there is a deep and gentle wisdom in that, a wisdom worth holding on to, for it tells us something true and comforting about grief and about the human heart, that a heart can break and still go on, that we can lose someone we love more than life itself, and still, in time, find our way back to joy, that grief does not have to destroy us, that it can become instead a tender and permanent part of who we are, a mark of how deeply we loved, carried gently through all the years that follow. The young hero never stopped missing the young woman with the long fair hair, but he learned to carry her memory tenderly, to let it be a part of him, to honor it not by breaking but by going on, by continuing to be good, by continuing to love and to help and to protect, in her memory and in her honor. And so this saddest of stories is not, in the end, a story of despair, but a story of a heart that broke and did not shatter, that grieved and did not give up, that carried its sorrow with tenderness and went on. And that, perhaps, is the deepest kind of strength of all, deeper even than the strength that lifted the impossible weight, the strength to grieve and to go on, to carry a terrible loss and still keep one's heart open and gentle and kind. And it is a strength that lives in all of us, in everyone who has ever loved and lost, everyone who has ever carried a grief and gone on carrying it, gently, through the years. And if you carry such a grief yourself, as so many of us do, you may take some quiet comfort tonight in the thought of the young hero who lost the great love of his life and did not break, who carried his sorrow tenderly and went on being good, and who teaches us, in his gentle way, that a broken heart can still go on and love again and find its way, in time, back to peace. So let that sad, soft story settle now, and grow still, and let its sorrow drift away like a slow grey rain passing on into the distance, leaving everything washed and quiet and at peace. There is nothing in it to trouble you, nothing to keep you awake, only a gentle old sadness, held tenderly and set down gently, and the quiet, comforting knowledge that even the deepest grief can be carried and gone on from and made peace with in time. And you may rest now and let go of it and drift on toward the next story, softer and easier as the night deepens around you and sleep draws nearer. Let me tell you now a story about one of the young hero's enemies, for the old tales are full of colorful enemies, strange and dangerous men and women who set themselves against the young hero over the years, and some of them were simply wicked, but many of them were something more complicated and more interesting than that, were people who had been broken or twisted or led astray, people in whom some spark of humanity still flickered. And the story I want to tell you is about one of these, about an enemy who was also, in his strange way, a kind of mirror of the hero himself. For this enemy was a brilliant scientist, a man of great gifts, who had, like the young hero, been changed by an accident with strange forces, an accident that had fused to his body 4 great mechanical arms of gleaming metal, powerful arms that moved at his thought and that gave him strength and reach far beyond any ordinary man. But where the young hero's accident had, in the end, made him better, had taught him responsibility and turned him toward the service of others, this man's accident had done the opposite, had damaged his mind along with his body, had turned his brilliance to arrogance and his ambition to madness, so that he became a criminal, a dangerous and powerful criminal, one of the young hero's most persistent and formidable enemies. And for many years the two of them fought, again and again, the young hero and the man with the 4 metal arms, and it seemed that they were simply enemies, simply hero and villain, locked in an endless struggle. But the truth, as the young hero slowly came to understand, was more complicated than that, for the two of them were, in many ways, alike. Both were brilliant scientists. Both had been changed by an accident with strange forces. Both had been given great power. The only difference, the whole difference, was what they had chosen to do with it. The young hero turning his power to the service of others, the villain turning his to his own arrogant ends. And this likeness troubled the young hero, and it troubled the villain too, in his twisted way, for each of them saw in the other a kind of reflection, a glimpse of what he himself might have become. The young hero looked at the villain and saw what he might have been if his uncle's death had not taught him responsibility, if he had let his gifts make him arrogant and selfish instead of humble and giving, if he had turned his power inward instead of outward. And the villain, in his rare moments of clarity, looked at the young hero and saw, perhaps, what he himself might have been, if his own accident had not broken his mind, if he had chosen differently, if he had turned his brilliance to good instead of to evil. And there is something haunting in that, in the way the hero and the villain were 2 versions of the same person, divided only by a choice, and it is a thing worth resting on gently. The thought that what makes us good or wicked is so often not our gifts or our circumstances, but simply the choices we make, day by day, with what we have been given. And there came a time, late in the villain's life, when this likeness became something more than a haunting reflection, when the villain, near the end of his strange and troubled life, seemed almost to reach toward the goodness he had turned away from so long ago. For the young hero came to understand that beneath all the arrogance and the madness and the crime, there had once been a good man, a brilliant and hopeful young scientist who had wanted, once, to do great things for the world, before the accident broke him, and that this good man was not entirely gone, but lingered still, buried deep beneath the villainy, flickering faintly like a candle behind a dirty window. And in certain moments, rare and precious moments, this buried goodness would show itself. In an unexpected act of mercy, in a flicker of regret, in a strange, reluctant respect for the young hero who was so like what he himself might have been. And this is why the young hero, for all their long enmity, could never quite bring himself to hate the man with the 4 metal arms, could never quite see him as simply a monster to be destroyed. For he saw the buried goodness, the flickering candle, the good man trapped beneath the villainy, and he grieved for it, grieved for what the man might have been, grieved for the choices that had gone wrong, and he hoped, always, in his good and stubborn heart, that the buried goodness might one day win out, that the good man might one day break free of the villain he had become. And though that hope was mostly disappointed, though the villain remained, for most of his life, an enemy, there is something beautiful in the young hero's refusal to give up on him, in his stubborn insistence on seeing the good that remained, however deeply buried, in even his worst enemy. And there is a deep and gentle wisdom in that, a wisdom worth carrying with you towards sleep, for it tells us something kind and true about how we might look upon even those who have wronged us, even those we have reason to fear or to hate. For the young hero teaches us, in his refusal to hate his enemy, that there is, in almost everyone, some flicker of buried goodness, some trace of the good person they might have been, some candle burning faintly behind the dirty window, and that we might choose, if we are generous enough, if we are good enough, to see that flicker, to hope for it, to refuse to give up on it, even in those who have done us harm. It is a hard thing to do, and the young hero did not always manage it, and neither do any of us. But it is a beautiful thing to aim at, this refusal to give up on the buried goodness in others, and it is a gentle and a hopeful thought to rest upon as you drift towards sleep, the thought of the hero who could not hate his enemy because he saw, too clearly, the good man trapped inside him. So let that story fade now too, the story of the enemy who was also a mirror, and let it grow soft and quiet, and let us drift on. For the night is deep now, and you are growing very drowsy, and the stories are washing over you like slow, warm waves, one after another, and there is nothing you need to do but let them come, and let them go, and sink a little deeper with each one, down and down toward the deep, sweet sleep that is waiting for you now. Let me tell you now one of the strangest and most haunting of all the young hero's stories. A story with the quality of an old, dark fable. A story about a hunter, and about the difference between the wild and the good, and about a young man who was buried in the earth and rose again. And though it has its shadows, as the deepest stories do, it is at its heart a story about the unbreakable goodness of the young hero, about how even when he was brought down as low as a person can be brought, even when he was buried in the very earth, the goodness in him rose again and could not be kept down, and I will tell it gently, so that its shadows become soft and its strangeness becomes dreamlike, the way strange things become dreamlike as we drift towards sleep. There was, among the young hero's many enemies, a hunter, a great and terrible hunter, a man of noble blood from a far-off land, who had spent his whole long life hunting the most dangerous beasts in all the world, the great cats and the great bears, and every fierce and deadly creature that walked the earth, and who had conquered them all, until there was nothing left in all the wild world that could challenge him. And this hunter, having conquered every beast, having no worthy prey left to hunt, had grown weary of life, and full of a strange, dark despair. For a hunter with nothing left to hunt is a hunter with nothing left to live for, and the great hunter felt his life had lost its meaning, felt that he was growing old, felt the shadow of death drawing near, and longed, before the end, for one last great hunt, one final worthy quarry, one last chance to prove himself the greatest hunter who had ever lived. And the quarry he chose, the last great prey he set his heart upon, was the young hero. For the hunter had come to see the young hero as the greatest of all beasts, the one creature he had never conquered, the ultimate prey, part man and part spider, agile and strong and cunning beyond any animal, and he became consumed with the desire to hunt the young hero, to conquer him, to prove himself at last the greatest hunter of all by defeating the one quarry that had always eluded him. And so the hunter prepared himself for a long time, with great care and great discipline, readying his body and his mind for the final hunt, drinking strange potions brewed from jungle plants that gave him, for a time, a strength and a ferocity beyond anything he had ever known, until he was ready, at last, to hunt the young hero and to bring him down. And he did bring him down. This is the dark heart of the story, and I will tell it softly. For the hunter, at the height of his strange jungle-brewed power, ambushed the young hero on a dark and rainy night, and fell upon him with all his fury, and defeated him, brought him down, overwhelmed him utterly, in a way that no enemy had ever quite managed before. And then the hunter did a strange and terrible thing, a thing out of an old dark fable. For having defeated the young hero, having brought him down at last, the hunter buried him, buried the young hero in the earth, deep in a grave beneath the rain-soaked ground of a great cemetery, and stood over the grave in the pouring rain, triumphant, believing that he had at last achieved his life's great purpose, that he had conquered the ultimate prey, that he had defeated the young hero and buried him in the ground and proven himself, at last and forever, the greatest hunter who had ever lived. And then the hunter did a stranger thing still, for having buried the young hero, having, as he believed, defeated and destroyed him, the hunter resolved to become him, to take his place, to put on a copy of the young hero's costume and go out into the city and be the young hero, to prove that he could do it better, that he was not only a greater hunter but a greater hero, that he could be everything the young hero had been and more. And so, while the young hero lay buried in the earth, the hunter went out into the night in the young hero's costume and hunted down criminals and fought them, but fought them with a wildness and a ferocity that the young hero had never shown, a savagery, a brutality. For the hunter was a hunter, and he did not merely stop the criminals but savaged them, fell upon them like a wild beast, so that the city began to whisper that the young hero had changed, had grown dark and violent and cruel. And here is the deep meaning of the story, the thing at its very heart, the thing worth resting on gently in the dark. For the hunter, in becoming the young hero, in putting on his costume and doing his work, revealed by contrast exactly what the young hero truly was, exactly what made him a hero, and not merely a powerful and dangerous man. For the hunter had the strength and the skill and the ferocity, and he could bring down criminals as well as the young hero ever could, better perhaps, more savagely. But he could not be the young hero, not truly, for he lacked the one thing that made the young hero what he was, the thing that was not strength or skill or ferocity, but something deeper, something in the heart. He lacked the gentleness, he lacked the mercy, he lacked the deep abiding care for the people he protected, the reverence for life, the refusal to be cruel even to the cruel, the goodness. And so the hunter, for all his power, could only be a savage imitation, a dark and violent shadow of the real thing. And in his very savagery he proved, without meaning to, that the young hero's true power had never been in his strength at all, but in his heart. And meanwhile, beneath the earth, the young hero was not dead. For the hunter had believed him defeated and destroyed, but the young hero was not so easily destroyed, and beneath the rain-soaked earth, in the dark and the cold of the grave, something in him refused to die, some deep, unbreakable spark of life and will and goodness that no defeat could extinguish. And slowly, over long days, buried in the earth, the young hero gathered his strength and his will, and at last, in a moment that has the quality of an old myth, of a story about death and resurrection, he clawed his way up out of the grave, up through the earth, and rose again into the light, alive, unbroken, himself. He had been brought as low as a person can be brought, defeated and buried in the very ground, and still he rose, still the goodness in him rose, still he could not be kept down, and there is something deeply and permanently hopeful in that image, the young hero clawing his way up out of the grave and rising again into the light, a living promise that goodness cannot be buried, that it rises again, that it cannot be kept down. And when the young hero rose from his grave and went out into the city, and found the hunter wearing his costume and doing his savage work, there might have been a terrible battle, a final reckoning, a bloody revenge. But that is not what happened, and the way it did not happen is the most beautiful part of the whole strange story. For the young hero, having risen from the grave, having every reason to hate the hunter who had defeated and buried him, did not seek revenge. He confronted the hunter, yes, and stopped his savagery, and reclaimed his own identity. But he did not destroy the hunter, did not savage him in return, did not repay cruelty with cruelty. For he was the young hero, and that was exactly the point. That was the whole difference between them, that the young hero, even risen from his own grave, even facing the man who had buried him, remained gentle, remained merciful, remained good. And the hunter, in the end, understood. For the hunter had achieved his great purpose, had defeated the young hero, had conquered the ultimate prey, had proven himself the greatest hunter of all, and had found, in the achieving of it, that it meant nothing, that it brought him no peace, that he was as empty and weary and without purpose as he had ever been, and worse, far worse, he had come to understand. In trying to be the young hero, in wearing his costume and doing his work, that he could never truly be what the young hero was, that he lacked the one thing that mattered, the goodness, the gentle heart, and that all his strength and all his skill and all his lifetime of hunting had never given him and could never give him the one thing that made the young hero truly great. And this understanding, this terrible late understanding of what he was and what he could never be, was more than the old hunter could bear, and his strange dark story came, soon after, to its own quiet and sorrowful end, an end I will not dwell upon, for it is a story to soothe you, not to sadden you. But the young hero lived, and rose, and went on, and the deep lesson of the whole strange fable remained, and it is a lesson worth carrying gently into sleep. For the story tells us, in its strange dark way, that the truest power, the truest greatness, is not in strength, not in skill, not in ferocity or conquest, but in the heart, in gentleness, in mercy, in goodness. The hunter had everything, all the strength and skill and power a person could want, and it availed him nothing, for he lacked the one thing that mattered. And the young hero, buried in the earth, stripped of everything, brought as low as a person can be brought, still had the one thing that mattered, the good heart, and it raised him up out of the very grave. And that is a deep and hopeful and comforting thing to rest upon, the knowledge that the thing which truly matters, the goodness of the heart, is a thing that cannot be taken from us, cannot be defeated, cannot be buried, but rises again, always, out of every grave into the light. So let that strange, deep story settle now, and grow soft, and grow dreamlike, and let it drift away into the deep waters of the night, the hunter and the grave and the rising again, all of it softening into the gentle blur of half-sleep. And you may rest now, and drift and let go, and sink a little deeper still, for the night is deep and warm around you, and there is nothing at all you need to do but breathe and rest and let the quiet stories carry you down. Let me tell you now something gentler, something warmer, a story not of enemies and battles, but of the quieter side of the young hero's life, the ordinary human side, the side that so many of the old tales, beneath all their adventure, are truly about. For the young hero was, when all was said and done, an ordinary young man, with an ordinary young man's worries and hopes and small daily struggles. And it is in these ordinary things, as much as in any battle, that the deep warmth of his story lives. And on this deep, quiet part of the night, when you are drifting far down towards sleep, it is these gentle, ordinary things that I would like to rest upon with you, the warm, small human heart of the whole long tale. For consider the young hero's aunt, the frail and gentle woman who had raised him, whom he loved so dearly, and whom he protected, all through the long years, from ever knowing the dangerous secret of his double life. This was, in its way, one of the quiet heroisms of his life, this constant, tender protecting of his aunt from worry, for he knew that if she ever learned the truth, if she ever knew the dangers he faced night after night, the fear of it might be more than her fragile heart could bear. And so he hid it from her all those years, hid the bruises and the exhaustion and the constant danger, made up small excuses for his lateness and his tiredness and his strange comings and goings, let her scold him gently for being unreliable, for being late, for missing dinner, and never once let her see the truth, never once let her carry the burden of fear that the truth would bring. And there was a deep tenderness in that, a deep and patient love, the young hero bearing not only the danger of his secret life, but the loneliness of never being able to share it with the person he loved most, all to spare her the fear. And consider, too, the way the young hero moved through his ordinary days, a young man like any other, worrying about money, worrying about his studies, worrying about whether the girl he liked would like him back, struggling to pay his rent, struggling to keep his little apartment, struggling with all the small, ordinary struggles of a young person trying to make their way in the world. For beneath the mask and the strange gifts, he was one of us, ordinary and struggling and human, and this, perhaps more than anything, is why so many people have loved his story for so long, because he was not a distant and godlike hero, but a familiar one, a hero who worried about his rent, a hero who was often late, a hero who struggled and failed and got up and tried again, a hero who was, in all the ways that mattered, just like us. And there is a deep comfort in that, in a hero who is one of us, who shows us that heroism is not something reserved for gods and giants, but something available to ordinary struggling people, something that lives in the ordinary human heart. And consider the deep, quiet joy that the young hero took for all his troubles, in the simple act of swinging through the city, of moving through the night air high above the streets, of doing the thing that his strange gifts allowed him to do. For amid all the danger and the weariness and the thanklessness, there was, always, this one pure joy, the joy of the swing, the joy of flying through the great canyons of the city between the tall buildings, the wind rushing past, the streets far below, the whole glittering city spread out around him. And in these moments the young hero was, simply and purely, happy, filled with the pure physical joy of movement and freedom and flight. And it is a lovely thing to imagine, as you drift towards sleep, the young hero swinging through the warm night air high above the sleeping city, free and joyful, the wind in his face, the lights spread out below him like a field of stars, and it is a gentle and a peaceful image to carry down with you into the dark. And consider, most of all, the countless small, quiet acts of kindness that filled the young hero's life, the acts that never made the newspapers, that no one ever thanked him for, that were not battles or victories, but simply small kindnesses, done because they needed doing. For the young hero spent his nights not only fighting great enemies, but doing 1,000 small good things, catching a person who had slipped from a rooftop, helping a lost child find their way home, stopping to reassure a frightened old person, pausing in the middle of some great task to help someone with some small trouble, going out of his way, again and again, to be kind, to be gentle, to help. And these small kindnesses, more than all his great battles, were the true substance of his heroism, the daily quiet goodness that no one saw and no one thanked him for, and that he did anyway, simply because he was good, simply because someone needed help and he had the power to give it. And there is something in that, something deep and true and worth resting on, in the way the young hero's real heroism lived, not in his great famous battles, but in these countless small quiet kindnesses, done in the dark, unseen and unthanked. For it reminds us that heroism, real heroism, is not mostly a matter of great dramatic deeds, of famous battles and mighty victories, but is mostly a matter of small, quiet kindnesses, done day by day, unseen and unthanked, simply because they need doing, simply because someone needs help and we have the power to give it. And this kind of heroism, the quiet kind, the small kind, the kind that lives in 1,000 tiny acts of everyday kindness, is a kind that all of us can practice every day in our own ordinary lives, and it is perhaps the truest and most important lesson of the whole long tale, that the world is saved, in the end, not by great dramatic deeds, but by countless small quiet kindnesses, done by ordinary people, day by day, simply because they are good. So let that warm, gentle story settle now, the story of the ordinary human heart beneath the mask, and let it fill you with a quiet warmth as you drift towards sleep, the warmth of small kindnesses, of ordinary goodness, of a hero who was one of us. And you may rest now in that warmth, and let it hold you, and let it carry you a little further down into the soft and waiting dark. Let me tell you now a story of healing and of new love, for you will remember that the young hero, in an earlier story, lost the great love of his young life, and grieved for her deeply, and carried that grief for many years. And I told you then that grief does not have to destroy us, that a broken heart can go on, and even, in time, love again. And now I would like to tell you how that came to pass for the young hero, how his broken heart, in time, found its way back to joy, for it is one of the warmest and most hopeful parts of his whole long story, and a fine thing to rest upon on the deep, quiet slopes of the night. For there was another young woman in the young hero's life, a young woman with dark red hair and a bright, laughing spirit, who had been for a long time only a friend, a lively and vivacious friend who seemed, at first, to be everything the gentle, fair-haired young woman was not. Carefree where she had been serious, dazzling where she had been tender, a bright spark of a person who lit up every room she entered. And for a long time the young hero did not think of this dark-haired young woman as anything more than a friend, for his heart belonged to another, and then, after his loss, his heart belonged to a memory, and he did not think that he could ever love again. But the dark-haired young woman was there, all through those years, a steady, bright presence in his life, and slowly, so slowly that he did not at first notice it happening, the friendship between them deepened into something more. For the dark-haired young woman, it turned out, was not only bright and laughing and carefree, as she had seemed. Beneath that bright surface there was a depth, a strength, a great tender heart, and a wisdom about pain and loss that came, the young hero slowly learned, from her own difficult life, from sorrows of her own that she carried behind her dazzling smile. And as the two of them grew closer, the young hero came to see the real person beneath the bright surface, the deep and strong and tender heart, and he came to understand that her brightness was not the absence of pain, but a kind of courage in the face of it, a choosing of joy despite everything, a lighting of candles against the dark. And he came to love her, not as a replacement for the one he had lost, for there is no replacing those we lose, but as a new love, a different love, a love for who she truly was. And here is the most beautiful part, the part worth resting on gently. For the dark-haired young woman knew about the young hero's grief, knew about the great love he had lost, and she did not ask him to forget it, did not ask him to pretend it away, did not compete with the memory of the one who was gone. Instead, she made room for it, made room for his grief within their love, understood that his heart could hold both things at once, the old sorrow and the new joy, the memory of the one he had lost and the love of the one who was here. And this making room, this understanding that a heart can hold both grief and joy at once, was the deepest gift she gave him, and it was what allowed him, at last, to heal, not by forgetting his sorrow, but by learning to carry it alongside a new happiness, both things together, in a heart grown large enough to hold them both. And in time the two of them married, the young hero and the dark-haired young woman, and though their life together was not without its troubles, for the young hero's double life brought troubles enough, they were happy, deeply and truly happy, in the way that two people are happy who have each known sorrow and found, in each other, a way back to joy. And she became his great partner, his confidant, the one person who knew all his secrets and shared all his burdens, the one person he need not hide from. And in her, the young hero found, at last, after all his loneliness, after all his grief, a home for his heart, a person to whom he could be, entirely and without hiding, himself. And there is no sweeter thing in all his long story than that, the lonely, grieving, hidden young hero finding, at last, a person to whom he could be wholly himself and be loved for it. And there is a deep and gentle comfort in that story, a comfort worth carrying down into sleep, for it tells us that healing is possible, that joy is possible, even after the deepest grief, that a heart which has been broken can not only go on, but can love again, fully and truly, can find its way back to happiness, can grow large enough to hold both its old sorrows and its new joys together. And it tells us too something beautiful about the kind of love that heals, that it is not a love that asks us to forget our sorrows or pretend them away, but a love that makes room for them, that understands, that lets us carry our grief and our joy together in a heart grown large enough for both. And that is a warm and hopeful thing to rest upon. The thought of the broken heart that healed, the grief that made room for joy, the lonely young hero who found at last a home for his heart. So let that warm story settle now, and let its gentle happiness fill you as you drift towards sleep, the warmth of new love, of healing, of a heart grown large enough to hold both sorrow and joy. And you may rest in that warmth now, and let it carry you further down, deeper and softer into the quiet. Let me tell you now another kind of story, a story about one of the young hero's enemies, who was not truly wicked at all, but only lost, only troubled, only a person who had gone wrong and longed, somewhere deep down, to go right again. For not all of the young hero's enemies were monsters or madmen. Some of them were simply ordinary people who had made bad choices, or fallen in with bad company, or been dealt a hard hand by life, and who might, with a little kindness, a little patience, a little belief, have found their way back to goodness. And the young hero, with his deep and stubborn faith in the buried goodness of others, was often the one who helped them find their way. And this is a story about one such person, a large and lumbering man made, through a strange accident, of living sand. For this man had been, before his accident, a small-time criminal, a petty crook, not a wicked man at heart, but a weak one, a man who had drifted into crime through hardship and bad luck and bad choices, and who had never really wanted to be a criminal at all, but had never quite known how to be anything else. And then, through one of those strange accidents that fill the old tales, he had been changed, his body transformed into living sand, so that he could turn himself into a great pouring stream of sand, or a giant of sand, or a hard-packed fist of sand. And with these strange new powers, he had become a much more dangerous criminal than before, and had fought the young hero many times over the years. But always, beneath the powers and the crime, there had remained the same essential person, not wicked but weak, not cruel but lost, a man who had never really wanted any of it, who was tired, deep down, of being a criminal, and who longed, without quite knowing how to say it, to be something better. And the young hero saw this, as he always saw such things, saw beneath the sand and the crime to the tired, lost man underneath. And over the years, in his patient, stubborn way, he tried to reach that man, tried to show him that it was not too late, that he could change, that there was still, in him, a good man who might yet find his way. And it was not easy, and it did not happen quickly, for the man of sand had been a criminal for a long time and did not believe, at first, that anything else was possible for him, believed that he was what he was and could not change, that it was too late for him, that a man like him did not get second chances. And there is a deep sadness in that, in the way people can become so convinced that they cannot change, that it is too late for them, that they are stuck forever being the thing they have become. And it is one of the saddest and most common of all human troubles, this belief that we cannot change, that it is too late. But the young hero did not give up on the man of sand, and slowly, over time, his patient faith began to work a change. For it is a powerful thing to have someone believe in you, to have someone see the good in you that you cannot see in yourself, to have someone insist, gently and stubbornly, that it is not too late, that you can change, that there is a better person in you waiting to come out. And the man of sand, who had never had anyone believe in him like that, who had been treated as a monster and a criminal for so long that he had come to believe it himself, found that the young hero's stubborn faith began, slowly, to change how he saw himself, began to make him believe, for the first time in a long time, that maybe it was not too late, that maybe he could be something better. And there came a time when the man of sand tried, truly tried, to go straight, to leave his life of crime behind, to become an honest man, and for a time he succeeded, and found, to his own amazement, that he could be good, that it was not too late, that the young hero had been right about him all along. Now, the old tales being what they are, the man of sand's road back to goodness was not a smooth or a simple one, and he stumbled and fell back and struggled, as people do, for changing one's life is hard, and the pull of the old ways is strong, and a person does not become good all at once but slowly, with many setbacks, over a long and difficult time. But the point of the story, the thing worth resting on, is not whether the man of sand succeeded perfectly, for none of us succeed perfectly, but that he tried, that he came to believe he could change, that the young hero's stubborn faith gave him something he had never had before, the belief that it was not too late, the hope that he could be something better. And that hope, that belief, is one of the greatest gifts one person can give another. And the young hero gave it freely, again and again, to the lost and the fallen and the troubled, refusing to give up on them, insisting that it was never too late, that anyone could change, that there was good in everyone waiting to be called out. And there is a deep and gentle comfort in that story, a comfort worth carrying into sleep, for it tells us something hopeful and true about ourselves and about everyone we know, that it is never too late to change, that we are not stuck forever being the thing we have become, that there is, in all of us, a better person waiting to come out, and that sometimes all it takes is for someone to believe in us, to see the good we cannot see in ourselves, to insist, gently and stubbornly, that it is not too late. And it tells us too that we might be that person for someone else, that we might give someone the great gift of believing in them, of seeing their buried goodness, of insisting that it is not too late for them, and that is a warm and hopeful thing to rest upon as you drift toward sleep, the thought that it is never too late for any of us to find our way back to the good. So let that hopeful story settle now, and let it warm you, and let us drift on, gently, deeper into the quiet night. For you are very drowsy now, I think, very far down towards sleep, and the stories are washing over you like the softest of waves, and there is nothing at all you need to do but let them come, and let them go, and rest. Let me tell you now, not so much a story as a quiet meditation, a gentle turning over of one of the deepest questions in the whole long tale, the question of the mask, of the two lives, of who the young hero truly was beneath it all. For you will have noticed in all these stories that the young hero lived a double life, was two people at once, the masked hero swinging through the city and the ordinary young man beneath the mask. And this doubleness was one of the great facts of his existence, one of its great burdens, and one of its great mysteries, and it is worth resting upon, gently, on this deep still part of the night, the question of the mask, and what it meant, and who the young hero truly was. For the mask was, in one sense, a great burden. It meant that the young hero could never be wholly himself with anyone, that he always had a secret, always had a part of his life that he could not share, that even with the people he loved most, he had to hide, to pretend, to keep a part of himself always concealed, and this was a deep loneliness, one of the deepest in his whole life, the loneliness of the person who cannot be wholly known, who must always keep a part of themselves hidden, who carries a secret that separates them, always, even from those they love. And many of us know something of that loneliness, the loneliness of the parts of ourselves we cannot share, the secrets we carry, the hidden rooms in our hearts that no one else ever sees. And it is a real and a deep loneliness, and the young hero carried it all his life. But the mask was also, in another sense, a kind of freedom, and this is the more interesting truth, the one worth resting upon. For when the young hero put on his mask, he became free in a way that the ordinary young man beneath it could never be. The ordinary young man was shy and awkward and unsure of himself, burdened by all the worries and insecurities of an ordinary life. But when he put on the mask, all of that fell away, and he became bold and quick and funny and free, cracking jokes in the middle of danger, moving through the world with a lightness and a confidence that the young man beneath could never manage. For the mask hid his face, and in hiding his face it freed him from himself, freed him from his shyness and his self-consciousness, freed him to be a bolder and brighter version of himself than he could ever be with his face bare. And there is a curious truth in that sometimes it is only when we are hidden, only when we are freed from the weight of being seen, that we can become most fully ourselves. And so the question arises, the deep question at the heart of it all: which of the two was the real person, the ordinary young man or the masked hero? Was the mask a disguise that hid the real person beneath, or was it the ordinary life that was the disguise, and the masked hero the truest self? And the answer, the young hero slowly came to understand, was that neither was a disguise, that both were real, that he was, truly and completely, both people at once, the ordinary struggling young man and the bold, bright, masked hero, and that the wholeness of him lay not in choosing between them, but in being both, in holding both together, the ordinary and the extraordinary, the shy and the bold, the hidden and the free. For we are all of us more than one thing, all of us made of many selves, and the wholeness we seek is not in cutting away the parts of ourselves that seem to contradict each other, but in holding them all together, in being, fully and without shame, all the many things that we are. And there is a deep and gentle comfort in that, a comfort worth carrying into sleep, for so many of us feel divided, feel that we are more than one person, feel the tension between the different selves we are in different parts of our lives, the self we are at work and the self we are at home, the self we show the world and the self we keep hidden, the ordinary self and the self of our dreams. And the young hero's story tells us that this doubleness, this multiplicity, is not a problem to be solved, but a richness to be embraced. That we need not choose between our many selves, but may hold them all together. That the whole person is the one who can be, without shame and without division, all the many things that they are. And that is a freeing and a comforting thought to rest upon. The thought that we may be, all at once, all the many selves we are, and that this is not a division but a wholeness. So let that gentle meditation settle now, the meditation on the mask and the many selves, and let it ease you as you drift towards sleep, the comforting thought that you may be, all at once, all the many things you are. And let us drift on, softly, deeper into the quiet. Let me tell you now one more thing about the young hero, a warm and heartening thing, for I would not want you to think, from all these stories, that he was always alone. It is true that his was often a lonely life, the lonely life of the masked hero with his hidden secret, and much of his work he did alone, swinging out into the night by himself, fighting his battles by himself, carrying his burdens by himself. But he was not always alone, and it is one of the warmer truths of his long story that, over the years, he found others like himself, other masked heroes, other good people with strange gifts who had chosen, as he had, to use those gifts in the service of others, and that he came to know them, and to work with them, and to count them, in time, as friends. For the great city and the wider world beyond it turned out to be full of such people, heroes of every kind, some with strange gifts like his own, and some with none, some who could fly and some who could not, some clad in armor and some in cloth, some famous and some hidden, but all of them, in their different ways, trying to do the same thing the young hero was trying to do, to help, to protect, to use whatever they had been given in the service of others. And when the young hero found them, and came to know them, and came to work alongside them, he discovered a thing he had not known he was missing, the deep comfort of not being alone, of standing shoulder to shoulder with others who understood, who shared the burden, who were trying, as he was, to do the right thing in a difficult world. And there is a great warmth in that, in the finding of others who share our burdens, our struggles, our hopes, and it is a warmth worth resting upon as you drift towards sleep. For the young hero learned, in coming to know these other heroes, that the burdens we carry alone become lighter when they are shared, that the loneliness of trying to be good in a difficult world is eased by the discovery that others are trying too, that we are not, after all, alone in our struggles, that there are others out there, more than we know, quietly trying, as we are, to do the right thing, to help, to be good. And this discovery, this finding of kindred spirits, was one of the great comforts of the young hero's life, and it is one of the great comforts available to all of us. The discovery that we are not alone, that others share our struggles and our hopes, that all across the world there are people, more than we could ever know, quietly trying, as we are, to be good, to help, to make things a little better. And there is a deep warmth in that thought, a deep companionship, and it is a lovely thing to rest upon in the dark, the thought of all the quiet, good people, all across the world, trying, as you try, to do the right thing, so that you are never, truly, alone. And the young hero learned too from these others, and they learned from him, for each of them had their own gifts, their own wisdom, their own hard-won lessons, and in sharing them, they all grew stronger and wiser than any of them could have been alone. Some of the other heroes were older than the young hero, and wiser, and became almost like mentors to him, teachers, guides, older figures who had walked the difficult road before him and could help him find his way. And some were younger and looked up to him, so that he in turn became a mentor, a teacher, a guide, passing on to the young ones what the older ones had passed on to him. And in this way the young hero became part of something larger than himself, part of a great chain of goodness passing down through the years, each generation learning from the one before and teaching the one after, all of them linked together in the great shared work of trying to make the world a little better. And there is a deep and beautiful comfort in that, in being part of something larger than oneself, part of a great chain of goodness, stretching back into the past and forward into the future, And it is a fine thing to rest upon, the thought of the great chain of good people, passing down their goodness through the years, and your own quiet place within it. So let that warm story settle now too, the story of the young hero finding others like himself, of not being alone, of the great chain of goodness passing down through the years. And let it fill you with a quiet, companionable warmth as you drift towards sleep, the warmth of knowing that you are not alone, that others share your struggles and your hopes, that all across the world and all down through the years there are good people trying, as you try, to do the right thing. And you may rest now in that warmth and let it hold you and carry you further down toward the deep, sweet sleep that is very near now. Let me invite you now, before the last quiet stories, simply to drift for a while through a single peaceful image, the image of the young hero swinging slowly through the great city on a calm, clear night, for it is one of the most soothing pictures in all his story, and a lovely thing to rest the mind upon as you sink towards sleep. So let yourself imagine it, gently, without effort, the way you might watch a slow film with your eyes half closed, the young hero moving through the warm night air, high above the quiet streets, unhurried, at ease, at peace. Imagine the great city at night, spread out below, all its countless lights glittering softly in the dark, the long straight avenues glowing with their rows of street lamps, the tall buildings rising up all around, their windows lit here and there with warm small squares of light where people sit up late or lie already sleeping. Imagine the deep quiet of the small hours, the hush that settles over even the greatest city when most of its millions of people have gone to their beds, the streets nearly empty, the traffic thinned to almost nothing, the whole vast city gone soft and still and peaceful in the dark. And imagine, high above it all, the young hero swinging slowly and gracefully through the warm night air, from one long web line to the next, rising and falling in great gentle arcs, the wind moving softly past him, the city sliding by below. There is no danger in this image, no enemy, no emergency, nothing to fear or to fight, only the pure, quiet joy of movement through the peaceful night, the young hero swinging slowly homeward through the sleeping city, at ease, at peace, taking a deep, simple pleasure in the beauty of the night and the freedom of the swing. He rises up in a long, slow arc, high into the warm, dark air, at the top of the arc seeming almost to hang for a moment, weightless, suspended, the whole glittering city spread out below him like a field of soft stars, and then he falls, gently, gracefully, swinging down and forward, the wind rushing softly past, the lights sliding by, and then he rises again, up into the dark, in another long, slow arc, unhurried, peaceful, at one with the warm night and the quiet city and the gentle rhythm of the swing. And there is something deeply soothing in that rhythm, the slow rising and falling of the swing, up and down, like the slow rise and fall of a calm sea, like the slow rise and fall of your own quiet breathing as you lie here drifting towards sleep. Let your mind follow that gentle rhythm now, the slow rising and falling, up into the warm dark and gently down again, up and down, and let it soothe you, let it carry you, let it rock you softly towards sleep, the way a boat is rocked by a calm sea. There is nothing to do but drift with it, up and down, through the warm, peaceful night, high above the sleeping city, at ease, at peace, carried gently along by the soft, slow rhythm of the swing. And as the young hero swings slowly homeward through the peaceful night, let yourself drift along with him, high above the quiet, glittering city, weightless and free and at peace, and let all the cares of the day fall away far below, small and distant as the tiny lights of the streets, and let yourself be carried gently through the warm dark toward home, toward rest, toward sleep. There is such peace in it, such deep, quiet peace. The slow swing through the sleeping city, the warm night air, the soft glittering lights, the gentle rising and falling, and you may rest in that peace now, and let it hold you, and let it carry you softly down toward the deep, sweet sleep that is waiting for you. So let that peaceful image settle now, the slow swing through the sleeping city, and let its deep quiet soothe you, and let us turn gently to the last of the quiet stories. Let me tell you now something about the particular kind of hero the young hero was, for there are many kinds of heroes in the old tales, and they are not all alike, and the young hero belonged to a particular and a very lovable kind, the kind that stays close to home, close to the ordinary streets and the ordinary people, the neighborly kind, the kind that people came to think of not as a distant and godlike protector, but almost as a friend, a familiar presence, the good soul of the neighborhood who watched over the ordinary streets where ordinary people lived their ordinary lives. And there is a deep warmth in that, in the particular neighborly kind of hero the young hero was, and it is a warm and homely thing to rest upon as the night grows deep. For some heroes in the old tales are grand and remote figures, who deal with great world-shaking dangers, who move among the mighty and the powerful, who save whole nations and whole worlds, and who seem, for all their goodness, rather far away from ordinary life, rather too grand to concern themselves with small ordinary troubles. But the young hero was never that kind. For all his adventures, for all the great dangers he sometimes faced, he remained, always, at heart, a local hero, a neighborhood hero, a hero of the ordinary streets, who was as likely to be found helping an old person carry their groceries, or rescuing a cat from a tree, or stopping a small street corner robbery, as saving the world from some great menace. He stayed close to the ordinary people, close to the ordinary streets, and the ordinary people came to love him for it, came to think of him as their own, as the friendly, familiar protector of their own particular corner of the great city. And there is something deeply lovable in that, in a hero who stays close to home, who does not hold himself above the small, ordinary troubles of ordinary people, but treats them as worthy of his care, who is as ready to help with a small thing as with a great one, who remains, for all his powers, a neighbor, a familiar, friendly presence, one of the people, for it tells us something true and warm about the young hero's heart, that he did not distinguish between great troubles and small ones, between important people and ordinary ones, but cared for all of them equally, treated every person's trouble as worthy of his help, saw the great value in small ordinary lives and small ordinary kindnesses. And the ordinary people felt this, felt that they were valued, felt that their small troubles mattered to him, and they loved him for it, loved him not with the distant awe one feels for a remote and godlike hero, but with the warm, familiar affection one feels for a good neighbor, a friend, one of one's own. And the young hero, for his part, loved the ordinary streets and the ordinary people right back, for they were his home, his neighborhood, his people, the streets he had grown up on, and the people he had grown up among, and there was nowhere he would rather be than swinging through his own familiar streets, watching over his own familiar people, being the friendly, familiar protector of his own particular corner of the world. For he was not a hero who longed for grand adventures in far-off places, but a hero who was deeply, contentedly at home in the ordinary streets of his own neighborhood, and who found, in the small daily work of watching over his own people, a deep and quiet happiness, the happiness of belonging, of being home, of being loved by and loving the ordinary people among whom he lived. And there is a deep and gentle comfort in that, worth resting upon as you drift towards sleep, in the picture of the neighborly hero, at home among his own people, watching over the ordinary streets with a warm, familiar love. For it reminds us that there is great value and great beauty in the small, ordinary world of neighborhood and home, in the ordinary streets and the ordinary people, and the small daily kindnesses of ordinary life, and that we need not look to far-off places or grand adventures for meaning and happiness, but may find them, as the young hero found them, right at home, in our own familiar streets, among our own familiar people, in the warm, small world of our own neighborhood. And there is a comfort, too, in the thought of the good neighbor, the friendly, familiar presence who watches over the ordinary streets, and in the wish, as we drift towards sleep, that our own streets and our own homes might be watched over so kindly, might be so warm, and so safe, and so full of quiet neighborly love. And you may hold that warm, homely thought gently now, as you sink towards sleep, the thought of the friendly neighbor watching over the quiet streets, and let it make you feel safe and held and at home. So let that warm, homely thought settle now too, and let us turn to one more quiet picture before the stories give way at last to the deep quiet of sleep. Let me tell you now a very quiet story, hardly a story at all, only a picture, a single warm, ordinary evening in the young hero's life, an evening of no adventure and no danger, only the simple, homely warmth of an ordinary evening at home. For these ordinary evenings were, though they never made the tales, among the most precious things in the young hero's whole life, and there is a deep, sweet comfort in resting upon one of them on this gentle part of the night. Imagine, then, an ordinary evening, early in the young hero's life, when his aunt was still well and the little house was still full of the warmth of her presence. The young hero has come home, tired from his day and his secret nighttime labors, and the little house is warm and bright against the dark outside, and his aunt is in the kitchen, making supper, filling the house with the good smell of cooking, humming softly to herself as she works, as she has done for as long as the young hero can remember. And he comes in, and she greets him with her gentle smile and scolds him tenderly for being late, and asks him about his day, and he sits at the small kitchen table in the warm, bright, familiar room, and watches her move about the kitchen, and feels, settling over him, the deep, quiet contentment of being home. And they eat their supper together, the two of them, at the small table in the warm kitchen, and they talk of small, ordinary things, of the neighbors and the weather and the small doings of the day, nothing important, nothing dramatic, only the small, easy talk of two people who love each other and have shared a home for many years. And after supper, the aunt washes the dishes, refusing his help, as she always does, and the young hero dries them, as he always does, and they finish the small, homely task together in the warm, bright kitchen, and then they sit together in the front room, the aunt with her knitting and the young hero with his books, in the soft lamplight, in the deep quiet of the evening, together, at peace, at home. And there is nothing more to the story than that. No adventure, no danger, no drama, only the deep, sweet, ordinary warmth of an evening at home with someone you love. But it is precisely in its ordinariness that its beauty lies. For these ordinary evenings, These small, homely times of warmth and peace and quiet companionship are, in truth, the most precious things in any life, the things we miss most when they are gone, the things we would give anything to have back. And the young hero, who lost so much, who lived so dangerous and difficult a life, treasured these ordinary evenings more than any of his adventures, for they were his refuge, his home, the still warm center around which all the rest of his turbulent life revolved. And when, in later years, he looked back on his life, it was not the great battles he remembered most fondly, but these, the quiet, ordinary evenings at home, in the warm, bright kitchen, with someone he loved. And there is a deep and tender comfort in that, worth carrying with you into sleep, the reminder of how precious the ordinary warm moments of our lives truly are, the quiet evenings at home, the small easy talk, the shared meals, the simple companionship of the people we love, all the small homely things that we so often overlook, that seem so ordinary while we have them, and that turn out, in the end, to have been the most precious things of all. For life is made, mostly, not of great dramatic moments, but of these small, ordinary, warm ones, and the happiest people are those who know to treasure them while they have them, to notice them, to be grateful for them, to sink into their quiet warmth as into a warm bath. And as you lie here now, drifting towards sleep, you might let yourself feel, gently, the preciousness of all the ordinary warm moments of your own life, the quiet evenings, the shared meals, the simple presence of the people you love, and let yourself be grateful for them, and let that gratitude warm you as you sink towards sleep. So let that quiet, warm story settle now too, the picture of the ordinary evening at home, and let its gentle domestic warmth fill you and hold you as you drift down towards sleep. Let me tell you now a small story about faith, about being believed in, for you will remember that the young hero was, for much of his life, feared and mistrusted by a great many people, turned against by the newspapers, blamed for things he had not done, treated as a menace when he was in truth a protector, and that this thanklessness was one of the heaviest of all his burdens. And there came a time, in the midst of all that mistrust, when the young hero grew very low, very discouraged, very close to despair, for it seemed to him that no matter how much he gave, no matter how many people he saved, the world would only ever fear and hate him, and he began to wonder, in his weariness, whether any of it mattered at all, whether anyone even wanted his help, whether he was doing any good in the world, or only wearing himself away for nothing. And on one particular night, when he was at his very lowest, when the discouragement had settled over him like a heavy grey fog, the young hero sat alone on a rooftop above the city, tired and disheartened, wondering whether he should simply give up, and a small thing happened, a very small thing that made all the difference. For down in the street below, a small child, out walking with their parent, looked up and saw the young hero sitting on the rooftop, and instead of fear, instead of the mistrust the young hero had grown so used to, the child's face lit up with pure delight, pure admiration, pure uncomplicated love, and the child waved up at him, both arms waving, and called out to him, a small happy voice floating up through the night, calling out that he was their hero, that they loved him, that they wanted to be just like him when they grew up. And that was all. It was a very small thing, a child's wave, a child's happy voice calling out in the night, but it reached the young hero in his low place, reached him more deeply than any grand gratitude could have done, for it was so pure, so simple, so uncomplicated, the pure faith of a child who saw him not as a menace, but as a hero, who believed in him, who loved him, who wanted to be like him. And in that small moment, the heavy grey fog of discouragement lifted from the young hero's heart, and he remembered why he did what he did, remembered that it mattered, that even if the newspapers hated him and the crowds feared him, there were people, ordinary people, small children and their families, who saw him truly, who believed in him, who were made a little braver and a little happier just by knowing that he was out there, watching over them in the night. And that was enough. That small child's wave was enough to renew his whole weary heart, and he rose up from the rooftop with his discouragement gone, ready to go on, remembering once again why it all mattered. And there is a deep and gentle truth in that small story, worth resting upon as you drift towards sleep, about how much a small thing can mean to a discouraged heart, about the power of being believed in, of being seen truly, of being reminded in a low moment that what we do matters, that someone sees, that someone cares, that we are making a difference even when it does not feel like it. For all of us grow discouraged sometimes. All of us wonder sometimes whether what we do matters, whether anyone sees, whether we are making any difference at all. And in such moments, so often, it is some small thing that renews us. A kind word, a grateful smile, a child's wave, some small sign that we are seen, that we matter, that our quiet giving is not for nothing. And there is a comfort in knowing that such small renewing moments come, that they are there, waiting, in the midst of our discouragement, and a comfort too in knowing that we might be that small renewing moment for someone else, that our own small wave, our own kind word, our own grateful smile might reach some discouraged heart and renew it, might be, for someone, the child's wave that lifts the heavy fog. And that is a warm and hopeful thought to rest upon, the great power of small kindnesses to renew the weary heart, and your own power to give them. So let that small warm story settle now too, the story of the child's wave and the renewed heart, and let it warm you, and let us drift on, gently, toward the last of the stories. Let me tell you now a story about friendship, and about how friendship can turn, in the saddest of circumstances, to enmity, and about the deep grief of losing a friend, not to distance or to death, but to a change of heart, to a turning that carries them somewhere you cannot follow. For among all the young hero's enemies, the ones who grieved him most were not the strangers and the monsters, but the ones who had once been close to him, the ones he had once cared for, the friends and the near friends who had turned, over time, into enemies. And this is a story about one such turning, told gently, for it is a sad one, and I would not want it to weigh upon you as you drift towards sleep. For there was a young man whom the young hero had known and cared for, a friend from his younger days, the son of a wealthy and powerful family, a troubled young man who had never had the warmth and the love that the young hero, for all his poverty, had always had from his aunt and his uncle. This friend had grown up in a great cold house with a distant, demanding father, a father who loved his son in his way, but could never show it, could never give the boy the warmth and the approval he so desperately craved, so that the young man grew up hungry for love, hungry for approval, troubled and insecure beneath a bright and privileged surface. And the young hero, seeing this hunger, this trouble, had befriended the young man, had shown him kindness, had been for a time one of the few true friends he had ever had. But the young man's troubles ran deep, and his family's troubles ran deeper still. For his father, the cold and powerful man, harbored dark secrets, and in time those secrets brought tragedy upon the whole family. A tragedy that I will not detail, for it is a dark one, but that shattered the troubled young man's life and turned his grief and his instability over time toward madness and toward a terrible bitterness, and at last toward the young hero himself, whom he came, in his madness and his grief, to blame for all his sorrows. And so the friend became an enemy, one of the young hero's most personal and most painful enemies, for every time they fought, the young hero saw not a monster, but the troubled young man he had once befriended, the hungry, unloved boy beneath the madness, and grieved for him, grieved for the friend he had lost, grieved for what might have been if the young man had only been given the love he needed, if his life had only turned out differently. And this, the losing of a friend to enmity, to a turning of the heart, was one of the deepest sorrows of the young hero's life, deeper in some ways than the sorrows of death, for the friend was not gone, was still there, still alive, but changed, turned, become someone the young hero could no longer reach, someone who now hated him, someone lost not to death but to a darkness of the heart. And there is a particular grief in that, the grief of losing someone who is still alive, of watching someone you cared for turn into someone you no longer recognize, of grieving a friendship that is not ended by distance or death but poisoned from within. And it is a grief that many of us know, the grief of the friend who changed, the loved one who turned away, the relationship that curdled and soured and became something painful, and it is one of the quietest and deepest of all human sorrows. But even here, even in this deep sorrow, the young hero's goodness showed itself, for he never gave up on his lost friend, never stopped grieving for him, never stopped hoping, in his stubborn good heart, that the troubled young man might one day find his way back, might one day be healed, might one day return to the friendship they had once shared. And there were moments, rare and precious moments, when the lost friend seemed almost to return, when the madness lifted for a time, and the troubled young man beneath showed himself again, and reached, however briefly, back toward the friendship he had lost. And in those moments, the young hero's stubborn hope seemed almost justified, seemed almost to be rewarded. And though the friend's story was, in the end, a sad one, there was in it always this thread of hope, this refusal to give up, this grieving love that would not let go. And it is that, the grieving love that would not give up on a lost friend, that is worth resting upon, gently, as this sad, soft story fades. For it tells us something tender and true about love and about loss, that we may lose people in many ways, not only to death, but to change, to turning, to the slow poisoning of what was once good between us, and that these losses too deserve to be grieved, and that we may, if we are good enough, if we are stubborn enough in our love, never quite give up on those we have lost, may keep, always, a small candle of hope burning for them, a hope that they might one day find their way back, that the friendship might one day be healed, that the turning might one day turn again toward the good. And even when that hope is not rewarded, even when the lost friend is never quite recovered, there is a kind of grace in the hoping itself, in the refusal to give up, in the grieving love that keeps its candle burning in the dark. And that is a tender thing to rest upon, the grieving love that does not give up, the small candle of hope kept burning for those we have lost. And you may hold it gently now, as this sad story softens and fades, and let it carry you a little further down towards sleep. So let that sad, soft story settle now, and let its gentle sorrow drift away, and let us turn, for a moment, before the last stories, to a gentler question, the question of why, in the end, the young hero kept going at all, through all his losses and all his sorrows and all his endless thankless struggles, what it was that kept him going, that gave his difficult life its meaning. For it is a question worth asking, and its answer is a deep and gentle comfort, and a fitting thing to rest upon on the deep, quiet slopes of the night. For the young hero's life, as we have seen, was not an easy one. He lost people he loved. He was feared and hated by many of the very people he protected. He struggled, always, with money and with loneliness, and with the endless demands of his double life. He carried a heavy burden of guilt and grief. He gave and gave and gave and received, so often, only suffering in return. And we might well ask why he kept going, why he did not give up, why he did not grow bitter and hard and turn away from a world that gave him so little and asked of him so much. And the answer, the deep, quiet answer, is not that he kept going out of duty, though he had a strong sense of duty, and not that he kept going out of guilt, though he carried much guilt, but that he kept going, in the end, out of love, out of a deep and simple love for people, for the ordinary people of the world, for their goodness and their struggles and their small brave lives, a love so deep and so simple that it could carry him through anything. For the young hero loved people, truly loved them, loved the frightened person he pulled from the flood, and the lost child he carried to safety, and the troubled soul he sat beside on the bench in the night, loved them not as abstractions, not as a duty, but as real people, precious and irreplaceable, each one worth saving, each one worth everything. And it was this love, this deep and simple love for the ordinary people of the world, that gave his difficult life its meaning, that made all the struggle and the sorrow and the sacrifice worthwhile, that kept him going through everything. For when you love people, truly love them, then helping them is not a burden but a joy, not a duty but a privilege, and even the hardest sacrifice becomes bearable, becomes meaningful, becomes an expression of that love. And the young hero, for all his sorrows, was, at the deepest level, a happy man, a fulfilled man, a man whose life had deep meaning because he loved and because he spent his life in the service of what he loved. And there is no deeper happiness than that, no deeper meaning than a life spent in the service of love. And there is a profound and gentle comfort in that, worth carrying with you down into the deepest part of sleep, the understanding that meaning, real meaning, the kind that can carry us through any hardship, comes not from success or comfort or reward, but from love, from loving something beyond ourselves and spending our lives in its service. For all of us long for meaning, long for our lives to matter, long for something that can carry us through the hard times. And the young hero's story tells us, gently, where that meaning is to be found, not in what we get, but in what we give, not in being loved, but in loving, not in success, but in service, in finding something beyond ourselves to love and pouring out our lives in its service. And that meaning is available to all of us, every one of us, for all of us have something we can love, someone we can serve, some way we can pour out our lives for something beyond ourselves. And in that pouring out, that loving, that service, we find, as the young hero found, the deepest meaning and the deepest happiness a human life can hold. And that is a beautiful and a peaceful thought to rest upon as you sink towards sleep, the thought that a life of love and service is a life of deep meaning and deep peace, and that such a life is within the reach of every one of us. So let that gentle thought settle now, the thought of the love and the meaning that carried the young hero through everything, and let it fill you with peace. And let us turn now toward the last of the stories, and then toward the quiet. Let me tell you now a story about growing old, for even the young hero's enemies grew old, as all of us grow old, and among his oldest enemies, there was one who was already old when their long rivalry began, an aging man who flew through the air on great mechanical wings, and whose whole strange story was, at its heart, a story about the fear of growing old, and about the strange and desperate things that fear can drive a person to do. And it is a gentle and a thoughtful story in its way, and a fitting one for the deep, quiet middle of the night, when the mind turns naturally toward the passing of time and the softening of all things. For this enemy had been, in his younger days, a brilliant engineer, a maker of machines, a man of real gifts who had spent his life building things. But he had grown old, as we all grow old, and the world had begun to pass him by, to treat him as though he were finished, as though his best days were behind him, as though an old man had nothing left to offer, and this being cast aside, this being treated as old and finished and done, filled him with a terrible bitterness and a terrible fear, the fear of growing old and being forgotten, the fear of one's powers fading, the fear of being pushed aside by a world that has no more use for you. And out of this fear and this bitterness, he built himself a pair of great mechanical wings, wings that let him fly, and with them he became a criminal, an old man defying his age, an old man proving to the world that he was not finished, that he was still powerful, still to be reckoned with, still, in his way, young. And there was a kind of terrible energy in him, this aging winged man, an energy born of his desperate refusal to accept his own age, and it made him, for all his years, one of the young hero's most dangerous and persistent enemies. For he flew with a wild abandon, a fierce joy, the joy of an old man who had cheated his age, who had taken to the sky when he should have been sitting quietly by the fire, and there was, mixed in with his bitterness and his crime, a strange kind of vitality, a refusal to fade, a fierce insistence on living fully right to the end that the young hero could not entirely condemn. For the young hero understood, even as he fought him, that beneath the crime and the bitterness there was a deep and human fear, the fear of growing old, the fear of fading, the fear of being cast aside, a fear that all of us must face, sooner or later, in our own ways. And there is a deep and gentle wisdom to be drawn from that old winged enemy, a wisdom worth resting upon as you drift towards sleep. For his story shows us the wrong way to face the fear of growing old, the way of bitterness, of desperate defiance, of refusing to accept the passing of time and lashing out against it. And this way, the story tells us, leads only to crime and loneliness and a deeper unhappiness. But it points us, by contrast, toward a better way, the way of acceptance, of grace, of making peace with the passing of time, of finding, in each season of life, its own particular gifts, and of understanding that growing old is not a defeat to be raged against, but a natural part of the great gentle rhythm of all living things. For the seasons turn, and the year grows old, and the leaves fall, and there is a beauty in it, a rightness, a peace, and the person who can make peace with the passing of time, who can grow old gracefully, gratefully, gently, is far happier than the one who rages against it, far more at peace, far more free. And that is a gentle thought to rest upon on this deep, quiet part of the night, The thought of making peace with the passing of time, of accepting, gracefully and gratefully, the great gentle rhythm of the seasons of a life, of understanding that each season has its own gifts, and that there is a deep peace to be found in accepting the one we are in, whatever it may be. For time passes for all of us, and we all grow older, night by night and year by year, and there is no stopping it and no defying it, only the choice of how to meet it, with bitterness or with grace, with fear or with peace. And the deep quiet of the night, when the day is done and we lie at rest, is a good time to choose grace, to choose peace, to let go of our defiance and our fear, and simply rest in the gentle passing of the hours, trusting the great rhythm of things, at peace with time. So let that thought settle softly over you now, the gentle acceptance of the passing of time, and let it ease you, and let it carry you a little further down towards sleep. Let me tell you now a story of a great night of trouble in the city, a night when disaster came, not from any single enemy, but from the world itself, from a great storm, a great flood that swept over the city and put countless ordinary people in danger all at once, and of how the young hero spent that long, terrible night not fighting any villain, but simply helping, simply saving, simply being there, again and again, for one person after another, all through the endless hours of the storm. For sometimes the trouble in the world comes not from any villain at all, but from the blind forces of nature, from storm and flood and fire and quake. And in such times the true worth of a hero is shown not in any battle, but in the patient, tireless work of helping, one person at a time, for as long as the trouble lasts. For the storm came up out of the sea, a great and terrible storm, and the rain fell in torrents, and the waters rose, and the low parts of the city began to flood, and the wind tore at the buildings, and all across the great city, ordinary people found themselves suddenly in danger, trapped by the rising waters, stranded on rooftops, caught in flooded streets, frightened and helpless before the fury of the storm. And the young hero, when he saw what was happening, did not hesitate, but went out into the storm, into the wind and the rain and the rising waters, and began to help, and did not stop helping all through that long, terrible night. And there was no drama in it, no single great deed, no famous battle, only the endless patient work of helping, one person after another, hour after hour, all through the storm. He carried a frightened family from the roof of their flooding house to safety. He pulled a stranded person from a car caught in the rising waters. He found a lost child, alone and terrified in the storm, and carried them gently to safety. He worked alongside the ordinary rescuers, the firefighters and the police, and the countless ordinary people who came out to help their neighbors, all of them working together through the long night. And he was only one among many, one helper among many helpers, doing what he could, where he could, for as long as he could, tirelessly, patiently, all through the storm. And this, the young hero came to understand over the long hours of that terrible night, was perhaps the truest form of his heroism, this patient, tireless helping in the face of disaster, this being there, again and again, for one frightened person after another, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply helping because help was needed and he had the power to give it. For there was no glory in it, and no drama, and no famous victory, only the endless work, and the exhaustion, and the cold and the wet and the wind, and the faces of the frightened people, one after another, and the deep quiet satisfaction of having helped, of having been there, of having made, in the midst of the great blind disaster, some small human difference saved some lives, eased some fear, brought some comfort. And when the storm at last passed, and the waters at last began to recede, and the grey dawn came up at last over the battered and exhausted city, the young hero was spent, utterly spent, worn down to nothing by the long night's work, but at peace, deeply at peace, for he had done what he could, had helped where he could, had been there through the long dark night of trouble, and that, he understood, was what it was all for. And there is a deep and quiet inspiration in that story, worth resting upon as you drift towards sleep, for it shows us that heroism, in the end, is not mostly about defeating villains or winning battles, but about being there, patiently and tirelessly, in the times of trouble, about helping one another through the storms, both the storms of nature and the storms of life. For all of us, in our lives, face storms, times of trouble and disaster and fear, and in such times what we need, more than anything, is not heroes to fight our battles, but helpers to see us through. Patient, tireless helpers who will be there, again and again, through the long dark hours, until the storm passes and the dawn comes. And all of us can be such helpers for one another in the storms of life, patient and tireless and kind, being there for one another through the long dark nights of trouble, until the dawn comes, as it always comes. And that is a warm and a hopeful thought to rest upon, the thought of all the helpers, seeing one another through the storms, and your own place among them, and the sure and certain coming of the dawn. So let that story settle now too, the story of the long night of the storm, and the patient, tireless helping, and the coming of the dawn. And let it warm you, and let it carry you further down, deeper into the quiet, towards sleep. Let me tell you now one more story, a tender one, about the young hero learning, at last, to forgive himself, for this was perhaps the hardest lesson of his whole long life, and the most important, and the last one he learned. For you will remember that the young hero carried, all through his life, a deep and terrible guilt, the guilt of his uncle's death, which he believed he might have prevented, and the guilt of the fair-haired young woman's death, which he believed he might have prevented too, and countless smaller guilts besides, for a person who spends their life trying to save others will always, inevitably, fail sometimes, will always sometimes arrive too late, or choose wrongly, or fall short, and each such failure leaves its mark, its guilt, its wound. And the young hero, being who he was, being so good and so caring, felt each of these failures deeply, and carried them all his life, a great heavy weight of guilt and regret and self-blame that he could never quite set down. And this guilt, this endless self-blame, was in its way a kind of nobility, for it came from his goodness, from his deep caring, from his refusal to shrug off the harm that came to others as none of his concern. But it was also, in its way, a kind of cruelty, a cruelty he inflicted upon himself, for he held himself to an impossible standard, blamed himself for things he could not have prevented, took upon his own shoulders a responsibility for all the harm in the world that no single person could ever truly bear, and it wore him down, this endless self-blame, this impossible burden of guilt, wore him down more than any enemy ever had, for it was a burden he carried always, day and night, waking and sleeping, the terrible weight of all his failures, all the people he had not managed to save. And it took him a long, long time, most of his life, to learn the lesson that would finally ease that weight, the lesson of forgiving himself. For he came to understand, slowly and painfully, over many years, that he was only one person, that he could not save everyone, that he could not prevent all harm, that to blame himself for every failure, every loss, every person he could not save, was to hold himself to a standard that no human being could ever meet, was to demand of himself that he be more than human, that he be perfect, that he be a god. And he came to understand that this was not fair to himself, that he deserved, as much as anyone, compassion and forgiveness and understanding, that he had done his best, always, had given everything he had tried with all his heart, and that when he failed, as everyone fails, it was not a sin to be punished, but a sorrow to be mourned, and then, gently, forgiven. And learning to forgive himself was, for the young hero, the hardest thing he ever did, harder than lifting the impossible weight, harder than rising from the grave, harder than any battle he ever fought. For it is easy, so much easier, to be kind to others than to be kind to ourselves. Easy to forgive others their failures, while holding ourselves to an impossible standard. Easy to offer others the compassion we cannot offer ourselves. And the young hero, who had spent his whole life being kind to others, forgiving others, seeing the good in others, had to learn, at last, to turn that same kindness, that same forgiveness, that same generous seeing upon himself, to become at last as gentle with himself as he had always been with everyone else. And when he finally learned it, when he finally began to forgive himself, to be gentle with himself, to accept that he was only human and had done his best and deserved compassion for his failures rather than endless punishment, a great weight lifted from him, the greatest weight of all, and he found a peace he had never known. And there is a deep and tender comfort in that story, perhaps the deepest of all, worth carrying with you down into sleep, for so many of us carry, as the young hero carried, a heavy burden of self-blame, of guilt, of failing to forgive ourselves for our failures and our shortcomings, of holding ourselves to an impossible standard and punishing ourselves endlessly for falling short of it. And the young hero's story tells us, gently, that we might set that burden down, that we might learn, as he learned, to forgive ourselves, to be gentle with ourselves, to offer ourselves the same compassion and understanding that we so readily offer others, to accept that we are only human, that we have done our best, that our failures are sorrows to be mourned and then forgiven, not sins to be punished forever. And there is no more important lesson than that, and no more healing one, and no better one to carry with you into sleep. The gentle permission to forgive yourself, to be kind to yourself, to set down the heavy weight of self-blame and rest, at last, in your own compassion. So as you lie here now, drifting towards sleep, let yourself set down whatever burdens of self-blame you may be carrying, whatever guilts, whatever regrets, whatever failures you have been punishing yourself for. Let yourself be gentle with yourself now, as gentle as you would be with someone you loved, as gentle as the young hero learned, at last, to be with himself. You have done your best. You have tried. You are only human, and you deserve, as much as anyone, compassion and forgiveness and rest. So set it all down now, all the self-blame, all the guilt, all the weight of your own failures, and let yourself rest, forgiven, at peace, gentle with yourself at last. And let that gentleness carry you down, softly, towards sleep. So let that tender story settle now too, the story of learning to forgive oneself, and let its gentleness fill you, and let us come, at last, to the final story, and then to the quiet. Let me tell you one last story before the stories give way to the quiet, and let it be a small one, a gentle one, not a tale of great enemies or great battles, but a tale of a single ordinary night, a single small kindness, the kind of thing that the young hero did 1,000 times over, and that no one ever knew about, and that was, in its quiet way, the truest heart of everything he was. For I have told you of great battles and great losses, of impossible weights lifted and enemies defeated and graves risen from. But the young hero's life was not mostly made of such great dramatic things. It was mostly made of small ordinary nights, of quiet patrols through the sleeping city, of little troubles helped and little kindnesses done. And it is one such small ordinary night that I would like to end with, as you drift down towards sleep. Imagine, then, a quiet night in the great city, late, very late, the streets nearly empty, the tall buildings dark, most of the millions of people in the city asleep in their beds, as you are nearly asleep now in yours. And imagine the young hero swinging slowly through the quiet streets on his web lines, not hunting any enemy, not racing to any emergency, just moving through the sleeping city on his patrol, keeping watch in case anyone should need him. And the night is peaceful, and the city is quiet, and the young hero swings slowly along, high above the empty streets, at ease, at peace, taking a quiet pleasure in the stillness of the sleeping city, in the soft glow of the streetlights far below, in the great calm hush of the small hours when nearly everyone is asleep. And as he swings along through the quiet, he comes upon a small trouble, a very small trouble, nothing dramatic at all. On a bench in a small park, alone in the middle of the night, there sits a person, an ordinary person, someone who cannot sleep, someone who has come out into the night alone because their heart is troubled, because they are carrying some worry or some sorrow that will not let them rest, and who sits there alone on the bench in the dark, small and troubled, in the great empty night. And the young hero, swinging by above, sees this person, this small troubled figure alone in the night, and something in his good heart is moved, and instead of swinging on past, he comes quietly down and lands softly nearby, and comes over, gently, so as not to frighten them, and sits down on the bench beside them, this small, ordinary, troubled person, in the middle of the great quiet night. And they talk, the two of them, quietly, in the dark. Or rather, the troubled person talks, and the young hero listens with all the gentle, patient kindness of his good heart. Listens as the troubled person pours out whatever it is that has kept them from their sleep, the worry, the sorrow, the fear, the weight they have been carrying alone in the dark. And the young hero does not try to fix it, does not offer easy answers, does not tell them their troubles are small or their worries foolish, but only listens and understands and is there, a kind presence in the lonely night, someone to share the weight, someone who cares. And that, it turns out, is enough. For often that is all we need, not for someone to fix our troubles, but only for someone to be there, to listen, to understand, to share the weight for a little while, so that we do not have to carry it entirely alone. And after a time, the troubled person feels a little better, a little lighter, a little less alone, for they have shared their burden with someone who cared, and the weight of it has grown a little more bearable. And the young hero, seeing that they are a little eased, offers a few gentle words of comfort, a little kindness, a little hope, and tells them perhaps that things will look better in the morning, that they are not alone, that their troubles, however heavy, can be borne, and that the morning will come, as it always comes, and bring its light. And then, seeing that the troubled person is ready now to go home, ready now perhaps to sleep, the young hero rises and says a gentle good night and swings away into the dark, back up into the night, leaving the troubled person a little comforted, a little eased, a little less alone on their bench in the quiet park. And no one will ever know that it happened. It will never be in any newspaper. It was not a battle or a rescue or a great dramatic deed. It was only a small kindness done in the dark for a single troubled person on a single quiet night. And it was, in its quiet way, the truest and most important thing the young hero ever did. For this, in the end, is what the young hero truly was, beneath all the adventure and all the drama, beneath the great battles and the terrible enemies and the impossible feats, beneath the mask and the web lines and the strange gifts. He was, at the deepest heart of him, simply a person who cared, who could not pass by a troubled soul in the night without stopping to help, who spent his life, in ways great and small, easing the burdens of others, sharing their weight, being there when they needed him, doing small kindnesses in the dark for people who would never know his name. And that caring, that deep and stubborn kindness, was the true source of everything he was, the true meaning of all his adventures, the true reason that people have loved his story for so long and so deeply. For we do not love him, truly, for his strength, or his gifts, or his great battles. We love him for his heart, for his kindness, for the way he cared, for the way he stopped, again and again, to help the troubled soul on the bench in the night. And there is a deep and gentle comfort in that, the deepest comfort of all the stories, the comfort of knowing that such kindness exists in the world, that there are people who care, who stop to help, who share our burdens, who are there in the night when we are troubled and alone. And there is a comfort, too, in knowing that we might be such a person ourselves, that we might be the one who stops, who listens, who shares the weight, who does the small kindness in the dark. For the young hero's greatest gift, in the end, was not his strength but his example, the way he showed us, through all his stories, that the truest heroism is simply kindness, simply caring, simply being there for one another in the dark, and that this heroism is available to every one of us, every day, in 1,000 small, quiet ways. And that is the thought I would like you to carry down with you into sleep, the gentlest and the truest of all the thoughts in all these stories, that the world is held together, in the end, by small kindnesses, done in the dark, by ordinary people who care, and that you are one of them, and that you are not alone. So let that last small story settle now, and let it fill you with its quiet, gentle warmth, the warmth of small kindnesses, of caring, of not being alone in the dark. And now let all the stories begin, softly, to fade, for we have come nearly to the end of our long night together, and it is time now to let the stories go, and drift the rest of the way down into sleep. Let all of them settle over you now, gently, all the old stories we have wandered through together on this long, quiet night, and let them begin to blur and soften and merge into one another, the way the events of a long day blur and soften as we fall asleep. Let them all come together now into one warm, gentle dream, all the images from all the stories melting into one another, no longer separate tales but one soft flowing river of story, carrying you gently down towards sleep. There is the thin bookish boy in the quiet house, and the small spider descending on its thread, and the gentle uncle with his warm, easy smile, and the lesson learned in grief, that with great power there comes great responsibility. There is the weary young hero throwing away his costume and taking it up again, freely, out of love. There is the impossible weight in the flooded lair, and the young hero rising up beneath it, unbeaten, because he would not give up. There is the living darkness from beyond the stars, cast off at last in the ringing bell tower. There is the young woman with the long fair hair, and the grief that broke his heart and did not shatter it. There is the enemy who was a mirror, and the hunter who buried him, and the rising up out of the grave into the light. There is the dark-haired young woman who taught him to hold both grief and joy together, and the man of living sand who learned it was not too late to change, and the mask that freed him to be most fully himself, and the other heroes who taught him he was not alone. There is the warm, bright kitchen, and the ordinary evening at home, and the aunt humming softly at the stove, and the small child waving up from the street below, calling out in the night. There is the lost friend who turned to enmity, and the candle of hope kept burning for him in the dark, and the deep, simple love of people that gave the whole life its meaning. There is the aging man with his great mechanical wings, and the long night of the storm and the flood, and the patient, tireless helping, and the hardest lesson of all, the learning, at last, to forgive himself, to be gentle with himself, to set down the heavy weight of his own self-blame. And there is the small, troubled soul on the bench in the quiet park, and the young hero sitting down beside them in the dark, only to listen, only to be there, only to share the weight for a little while. Let all of these drift together now, softening, blurring, merging into one warm and gentle dream, and let the dream grow dim, and let the images fade, until they are no longer quite pictures at all, but only a warm, soft, formless glow, the feeling of the stories without their shapes, the warmth of them without their details, a gentle golden haze settling over you as you sink down toward sleep. You do not need to hold on to any of it. You do not need to remember. You may let it all go, now. All the stories, all the images, all the words, and simply rest, and drift, and sink, down into the warm, soft dark where sleep is waiting. And as the stories fade, let this last gentle thought remain, glowing softly in the dark, the deepest thought of all of them, the thought that all these stories, in the end, were really about only one thing, about kindness, about caring, about goodness, about a good heart that would not give up, on itself or on anyone else, that carried its griefs and its burdens and went on being good, that stopped, again and again, to help the troubled soul in the dark. And let that thought be a comfort to you now, as you drift down into sleep, the thought that goodness is real, that kindness is real, that there are good hearts in the world, and that you are one of them, and that you are safe, and that you are not alone. And notice, as that last gentle thought glows softly in the dark, how it gathers up all the others, how every one of the old stories was, in the end, only a different way of saying the same quiet, true thing. The boy who learned that with great power comes great responsibility, and the weary man who took up his burden again out of love, and the trapped hero who lifted the impossible weight because someone needed him, and the grieving heart that broke and did not shatter, and the hunter who could not be the hero because he lacked the good heart, and the lost friend and the man of sand and the troubled soul on the bench, all of them, every one, were only ways of telling the same gentle truth, that goodness is real, and that it is made not of strength but of kindness, not of power but of love, and that it lives, quietly, in ordinary hearts, in your heart, and cannot be defeated, and rises always, out of every grave, into the light. And that one true thing is all you need to carry down with you now into sleep. And even that you may hold lightly and let go of if you wish, for it will still be true whether you hold it or not, still be there, glowing quietly in the dark, whether you remember it or not, watching over you as you sleep. There is nothing you need to carry with you now into sleep, nothing to hold on to, nothing to remember, nothing to fear. All the stories are told, and all the day is done, and there is nothing left now but the warm, soft dark, and your own slow, easy breathing, and the deep, sweet sleep that is waiting to carry you gently through the night. You have done enough today, more than enough, and you have earned this rest, and there is nothing at all you need to do now but let go and sink down and sleep. Let your body grow heavy, heavier and heavier, sinking down into the softness beneath you, held and safe and warm. Let your thoughts grow slow and soft and quiet, drifting apart like clouds, thinning away into the gentle dark. Let each slow breath carry you a little further down, deeper and softer, past the last of the day's small worries, past the fading stories, down and down toward the deep, still place where sleep is waiting. There is nothing to fear here, and nothing to solve, and nothing to do, only the warm dark and the quiet, and your own slow breathing, carrying you gently down. You do not have to be strong tonight, and you do not have to be watchful, and you do not have to carry a single one of the day's small burdens down into sleep with you. The long day is over now, every last piece of it, and you carried it well, and there is nothing left of it to face or to finish, only the soft, dark closing gently around you, kind and safe and yours. Whatever weighed on you today, whatever small worries or old regrets you have been carrying, you may set them all down now, gently, and leave them in the quiet until morning, for the night asks nothing of you but rest, and you have earned it, and it is yours. Let each slow breath carry you a little further from the cares of the day, a little deeper into the warm, still quiet, a little closer to the deep, sweet sleep that is waiting for you now. And if it is a comfort, you might carry down with you into sleep the gentlest of all the thoughts from all the old stories, the thought of the good young hero swinging quietly home through the peaceful night, his work done, at peace, and the deeper thought beneath it, that goodness is real, that kindness is real, that the world is full of good hearts quietly caring for one another in the dark, and that you are one of them, and that you are held and safe and never truly alone. Let that gentle knowledge settle over you like a warm, soft blanket, and let it hold you, and let it carry you down. The great bright city is sleeping now, all its millions of lights gone soft and dim, all its troubles stilled, all its people at rest, and somewhere high above its quiet streets the young hero swings slowly home through the peaceful night, his work done, at peace, ready, like you, for rest. And you may let the whole of it go now, the city and the hero and all the old gentle stories, and let yourself sink down, all the way down, into the soft and waiting dark, safe and warm and held, with nothing at all to do but breathe and rest and sleep. Let your breathing grow slow and deep and even now, each breath a little softer than the one before, each breath carrying you a little further down, like the slow, gentle swing through the peaceful night, rising and falling, softer and slower with each turn. There is no thought you need to hold on to, and no thought you need to chase away. Only let them come and go as they will, drifting through the quiet like slow clouds across a night sky, thinning, softening, fading, until they are gone, and there is only the warm dark and the quiet and your own slow breathing and rest. You are sinking now, gently, softly, deeper with each slow breath, down past the last of the fading stories, down past the last of the day's small cares, down into the deep, still, warm place where sleep is waiting to receive you. Let the warm dark close gently around you now, soft as a blanket, kind as a friend, and let it hold you, and let it carry you down. There is nowhere you need to be, and nothing you need to do, and no one who needs anything from you now, only the deep, sweet rest that is yours, that you have earned, that is waiting for you now in the soft and gentle dark. Let go now, gently, of the whole long day, and the whole long night, and all the old stories, and sink down, softly, into sleep. Rest now, be at peace. You are safe, and you are warm, and you are not alone, and the morning will come gently when it comes, and until then, there is nothing at all but the quiet, and the dark, and your own slow breathing, and rest. Sleep well now, and let the gentle dark carry you softly down, all the way down, into the deep, sweet sleep that is waiting for you, and on through the quiet night, gently and safely and without a single care, toward the soft new light of morning. Sleep well, and rest easy, and let go, and be at peace. Good night.